This may be the most important video you ever watch. This is the extended version of the presentation I created for the Funnel 3 conference and shares with you a master blueprint for mind control and the global control system. This goes way more in depth than the version I submitted for Funnel. I know it's a lengthy presentation and it's a lot of information. It is vitally important to have a complete and holistic understanding of this information. Each piece is important in seeing the whole picture. And at the end, I reveal how to free yourself from mind control. So make sure you watch all the way to the end. Watch it in pieces if you need to, take notes. Let's get into it, and I hope you enjoy. So I'm very excited to share this with all of you today. Let's go ahead and begin. My name is Logan Hart. I am a spiritual student and teacher, a presenter, podcaster, musician, producer, artist, voice actor, and entrepreneur from Central Texas area. I am a voluntarist, pagan, animist, naturalist, syncretist, and a student of natural law. My journey has brought me to work and study in the areas of metaphysics, psychology, healing, shamanism, paganism, epigenetics, rune divination, meditation, breath work, and much more. My primary mission is to help humanity reclaim our individual and collective sovereignty by gaining and imparting onto others a deep understanding of true universal principles and the rejection and dismantlement of all physical, mental, and spiritual systems of slavery. I am the creator of The Wizard Factory, a spiritual philosophy platform featuring a video podcast and weekly live show. So as I said, I've been studying and teaching natural law for quite some time and have covered many topics over the years, but this will by far be my most comprehensive, in-depth, and pertinent presentation yet. So this presentation is called Trivium Hacking, Mind Control and How It Perpetuates the Slave System. This presentation is the culmination of many years in the making. It is the synthesis of countless hours of research, learning, observation, analysis, and testing. I am not a medical or psychological professional, and I have not been formally educated in these fields. This presentation is not intended for diagnosis or treatment of any mental illness or psychological damage. It is for informational purposes only. The information covered in this presentation has the potential to be extremely triggering for some and quite heavy for most. It is not my intention to be antagonistic or offensive, but simply to shed light on the objective condition of the human race, which is that of deep mind control and abject slavery. To accept that this is the current state is a prerequisite to properly receiving and comprehending this presentation. There will likely be areas covered which bring up unpleasant feelings and reveal areas in need of radical self-honesty, shadow work, and healing. The truth is, we are all under some level of mind control, as we have all been born into a cruel and immoral world. We all have trauma and shadow still to integrate, and we all have some work to do. Personal responsibility is always the first principle of being a spiritually mature being. If the information presented here upsets you, so be it. Our pain is often a pointer to cracks and shadows that need attention, to wounds yet unhealed. Allow this to be the opportunity to lean into that awareness. Do not resist what comes up for you, and do not automatically reject the information simply because of how it makes you feel. Take your time and apply critical thinking and deep and honest introspection to it. Mind control is the one overarching mechanism that perpetuates the slave system, the greatest threat to freedom and humanity itself. So how do you know if you're under mind control, let alone get out of it? You have to understand what it is and how it works. Have you ever asked yourself, how did we get here? How did things get this bad? What is wrong with people nowadays? Why are more and more people becoming so angry, bitter, hostile, depressed, and deranged, even suicidal? How could such horrors of Nazi Germany and Soviet Russia have happened? The Taliban, ISIS, Heaven's Gate, Jonestown, North Korea. The list seems endless. Torture, slavery, propaganda, tyranny, and genocide. How can ordinary people allow and even participate in such evils? Many people seem to at least have the basic understanding that something is terribly awry in our world, yet so very few actually have a good grasp on what is happening or understand the root cause. It is my intention with this presentation to shed some light on the psychological causal factors for the insanity of human behavior. Not only could this information empower you to start or continue the work on taking your own mind back, but hopefully at least offer you some level of comfort and understanding for why humans act the way they do, and explain the madness becoming increasingly prevalent in our world every day. You will notice many repetitive themes and concepts throughout this presentation. This is no coincidence. Pay close attention to these patterns and use associative thinking to correlate them to other seemingly innocuous aspects of normalized society. This repetition of themes was both intentional and unavoidable, as you will soon learn that common daily life is thoroughly entrenched in cult activity and abuse in every way. Besides, if repetition can be used to program, why not use it to deprogram? My desire is for this work to serve as a definitive and comprehensive blueprint for understanding mind control. This topic is so vast and extensive that it would take dozens of hours to truly cover everything. But my goal is to cover the essential components enough to give you a foundational understanding of the topic, of which you could continue to research for decades and beyond. This is not the fiction you see in Hollywood movies. This is very real, and it is happening everywhere and at all times. I encourage you to not simply believe what I say, nor reject this message due to some perceived lack of scientific evidence. Observe the world. Observe yourself. Apply these concepts to what you see, and determine for yourself the veracity of what I'm sharing here today. The knowledge of mind control has been amongst the most paramount information I have ever come to know in order to understand what is unfolding in our world today, and to understand the bizarre, erratic, violent, and self-destructive behavior of others. It is only through knowledge can we be empowered to bring about true and meaningful change. Human history becomes more and more a race between education and catastrophe. H.G. Wells. To be conscious of being manipulated is to have already stepped outside the matrix. Now, generally, I do think there's some nuance to this. Just being aware of the system is the first step. There's still a lot of work to do going past that. But to a large degree, the reason mind control is so effective is because people are completely unaware of what it is, how it works, or that it's even happening. So this is a quick overview of this presentation. We'll be covering what is mind control, how does mind control work, and how to free yourself from mind control. The greatest weapon of any oppressor is the mind of the oppressed. The human mind is the most delicate of all instruments. It is so finely adjusted, so susceptible to the impact of outside influences that is providing a malleable tool in the hands of sinister men. CIA Director Alan Dulles. So what is mind control? Mind control is the science and practice of influencing an individual, group, or an entire population by manipulating their thoughts, emotions, and beliefs, which all contribute to their capacity to act or not act within certain parameters of behavior in accordance with a particular agenda. It is perpetrated primarily using methods of persuasion, deception, manipulation, or coercion in order to induce conformity, compliance, or obedience. These methods and tactics are effective individually, but can be combined into exponentially more potent system of control known as trauma-based mind control, also known as psychological warfare, brainwashing, and coercive persuasion. The most insidious and effective form of mind control is that which is completely undetectable, wherein the victim believes the ideas, desires, fears, and behaviors implanted in their minds are their own. They are exercising their own free will, which in a way is technically true, yet highly manipulated. Put another way, mind control is not the removal of free will, but the usurping of it. Mind control can be employed at both an individual level as well as a collective level. Practically all of the fundamental mechanics and techniques of mind control apply in parallel across both the micro and macro levels. Once you've learned how it operates and being observant and vigilant, you can easily recognize this type of manipulation in your own interpersonal relationships as well as in communal, societal, and systemic institutions and cultural traditions. Not all mind control is inherently unethical, though one could argue about the semantics of this notion. But perhaps a useful delineation of the moral lines that could be drawn here are as follows. Light mind control can be seen as exercising ethical influence on others by using literal or artistic mediums to convey a message which is based in actual truth. The intentions behind it are to improve or benefit those you are trying to influence. It also respects the rights and autonomy of others and would never resort to deception, manipulation, or coercion. Its agenda or intended outcome is always for the elevation of consciousness, the betterment of all, and the holistic good. Teachers and parents, for example, are using light mind control when teaching their children or students that which is true and right. You could even consider this presentation as light mind control. Dark mind control is when the agenda is aligned to the interests of the one orchestrating it at the expense of its victims. Its agenda is the suppression and distortion of consciousness to exploit others for personal gain. It uses lies, distortions, manipulation, and abusive tactics to achieve its ends, and has no hesitation to violate the rights of others using coercion and even outright violence. This is the form of mind control we will be primarily observing within the context of this presentation. The mass mind control agenda is being carried out on a global scale by individuals who could be described as dark occultists. A dark occultist is one who utilizes the obscuration and monopolized leverage of the secret universal knowledge of cosmic law and esoteric psychology to maintain a power differential over the uninitiated masses at large. These social engineers hold high positions of power across key institutions of systemic infrastructure, including government, religion, banking, healthcare, media, education, and other fundamental organizations who can utilize these apparatuses in unison to perpetuate this mass mind control. They see themselves as gods, the rightful masters of humanity who can shape and manipulate the population of Earth as they see fit, as pawns to be used and abused to carry out their selfish will. These individuals understand that if you control a person's mind, you subsequently control their actions and therefore their creative power, which can then be co-opted to serve your own goals. This is why mind control is such a vital topic and why these dark occultists place their primary focus on expending vast energy and resources towards this practice. Control the mind and you control the world. The primary purpose of mind control at the highest level, as it is discussed in this presentation, is to keep the current control matrix in effect. The control matrix is the false reality that has been grafted upon the natural world in order to shroud and obfuscate the true reality of this world and our own infinite power and value. The ultimate goal of this system is the advancement of the New World Order agenda, to keep the masses locked in a state of perpetual slavery, with these dark elites acting as gods and rulers in total dominion over mankind. The system is fundamentally anti-human, and its sole function is the destruction of freedom and all that is good. And how is this accomplished? By making the people falsely believe that they are free, when in reality they are slaves. This is utilizing or exploiting the illusion of choice and offering limited or false dialectics, making them believe that freedom doesn't exist or that they do not deserve it, or by limiting their consent and the freedoms available to them through violence and coercion. The disempowerment of humanity is manifest by way of ignorance of self, their existential condition of slavery, and natural law, juxtaposed by the deeply intimate understanding of these dynamics possessed by the ruling class. The title I chose for this presentation is Mind Control and How It Perpetuates the Slave System. The term perpetuates is a verb that means to cause or prolong the continuation of something, often a negative or undesirable situation or behavior. It refers to the act of maintaining, sustaining, or keeping something in existence or in a particular state over a prolonged period of time. When something perpetuates, it typically continues or remains unchanged, often reinforcing or prolonging an existing condition, pattern, or belief. Mind control is the self-reinforcing mechanism which perpetuates the system of slavery and keeps it in place. If spirituality is defined as the expansion of consciousness, and mind control is the suppression of consciousness, then mind control is de facto spiritual warfare. Mind control or coercive persuasion is an ancient practice which has been around for millennia, probably longer, but was greatly refined and perfected over the last century. Most antiquated knowledge about this topic generally originated from rulership, dungeons, that is to say torture, and churches via religious conversion. To learn more about the ancient sources of mind-controlled knowledge, you can study despotism, overt slavery and serfdom, the Dark Ages, the Spanish Inquisition, and even American revivalism, which is, more modern but on the cusp. Most modern knowledge about this topic comes from a wide variety of sources. Interrogation and torture of dissidents of war, POW camps. This was very widespread with the Russian, Nazi, Chinese, and Korean soldiers. Scientific and government operations conducted by academia and military and intelligence organizations. And usually there was a lot of commingling of the two. Ivan Pavlov, Edward Bernays, B.F. Skinner are some examples of scientists who really pioneered a lot of this knowledge in the modern day. The Montreal experiments, MK Ultra, and Tavistock Institute. Now, much of the documented information are regarding research and experimentation of mind control funded by the CIA under projects such as MK Ultra and the Montreal experiments under Cameron. These projects claim to have been focused on the methods of electroshock therapy, various psychotropic drugs, and other peripheral techniques. The official narrative is that these experiments were generally found to be ineffective and deemed as failures. However, it is my opinion that one of three are the more likely explanation. One is that these particular declassified projects serve as a red herring to distract the public from other more successful projects which are still classified in secret. 2, the techniques were actually more successful than the ostensible outcomes were reported. And 3, these projects employed other techniques not listed, which were far more effective. Honestly, I think the most likely is that it's probably some combination of all three. Of course, this is pure reasonable speculation on my part, but one simply needs to ask themselves, when does the government ever fully disclose the full truth about anything, especially secretive experiments to control the human mind. Simply consider that with matters such as these, sometimes failure and incompetence is more palatable to the public than willful, incompetent evil. It is more favorable to these institutions to accept the backlash of a failed experiment than to admit that they now have the capacity to control people and the moral corruption to use it. Then you have hostage and kidnapping situations such as the Norman bank robbery and the famous case of Patricia Hearst, and religious cult phenomena such as Heaven's Gate, Jonestown, Branch Davidians, and the Manson family. Now, to me, it is also just as plausible that some of the famous religious cults were actually carried out by covert intelligence operatives who were conducting microcosmic field experiments to prepare for scaling up to the societal level. Again, it is dubious speculation. However, it is entirely feasible to me. It is much easier for the public to accept that these cult leaders were simply rogue outliers who just so happened to have a profoundly deep understanding of cult techniques to a high level of competence. So let's look at some fundamental psychology. To properly understand mind control and how it operates, one must first have some basic understanding of how the mind itself works. The law of mentalism is the principal fundamental truth that all forms in manifestation, physical or otherwise, are first conceived via mentation. First from the mind of the all, the divine cosmic consciousness that created this reality. Then we reflect this as individual fractals of divine consciousness and lesser creators in God's image via the law of correspondence, as above, so below, as within, so without. This is going to be a very prevalent theme throughout this presentation of this internal and external, this correspondence dynamic. Again, this is precisely why mind control is such a prevalent dynamic, an essential concept to understand. All is mind. Control the mind, control the world. And keep in mind, this works both ways, in both a light and dark connotation. If the collective mind is aligned with truth and morality, we can create a world that is harmonious and prosperous for all beings. But if the aggregate mental state is deviated from truth and morality, the inescapable result is hell on earth, which is what we have right now. So this is the triune brain. Triune means 3 in 1. So the human brain has these 3 levels: the R complex, the limbic system, and the neocortex. The R complex is the reptilian brain, limbic is the mammalian brain, and the neocortex is the human brain. So the R complex is in charge of survival, fight or flight, instincts, automatic functions, and stimulus response. This is also known as the brain stem. It is the lizard brain. Then you have the limbic system. This is in charge of reproduction, rest and digest, emotions, memories, and habits. And then the neocortex is the human brain, responsible for higher cognition, language, rational and abstract thinking, creativity, awareness, and morality. And these levels are a sort of a hierarchy, each building on the lower levels to unlock higher states of consciousness. All components must be balanced and in healthy functionality in order for the brain to be working at optimal capacity. Then within the neocortex, you have the left and right hemispheres. The left side of the brain is the masculine side. The right side of the brain is the feminine side. This has nothing to do with male and female, although men tend to be more left brain dominant and women tend to be more right brain dominant. But what I mean by masculine and feminine is that these correspond to masculine traits or tendencies. So again, left brain is all about specific thinking, analytical thought. It is numbers, it is language, reasoning, logic, science, and math. The right side is holistic thinking. It is emotional, It deals with imagination, expression, art, intuition, creativity, and so forth. So as I said, when the brain is working in a state of imbalance, this starts to cause some problems. So when a person is too left brain dominant, it results in executive function of the R complex. So you lose emotionality and higher human thinking. You're in your base brain, and this results in what is called master mentality or dominator mindset. It is you become ruled by selfishness and base desires and obsessed with control. Conversely, when a person becomes right brain imbalanced, it results in executive function of the limbic brain. This results in slave mentality. You're ruled by emotions and become very passive. It is only through proper balance of both hemispheres and the neocortex acting as the executive command center that the full human capacity for true intelligence can fully be unlocked and accessed, especially that of the frontal lobe where empathy and morality are sourced. The word intelligence is a combination of two words, intellect and the generative principle. So the intellect is the logical principle. The generare, which comes from Latin, is the creative principle. So together, these words make intelligence. So true intelligence is the left and the right side both coming together. Now for some fundamental philosophy. So to explore philosophy in the search for truth, one must first examine the concept of truth itself and whether or not it exists. To even ask this question is a validation that it does, for to ask any question is to imply that there is an answer, one which is based in objectivity and universally consistent. Truth is not subject to perception, emotions, or belief. It simply is. Truth is the highest authority in the universe. Knowledge is but truth discovered, and if knowledge is power, then ignorance is powerlessness. The Latin word for both freedom and book is liber. The word liber means both freedom and book. This tells you something very important. In reality, in truth, knowledge and freedom are inextricably linked. So, on the other hand, you have solipsism. Solipsism is the assertion that the existence of only one's own mind as certain, and the existence and nature of external reality as uncertain or unknowable. Again, all solipsistic arguments are self-defeating, since this very belief is an assertion that this is the true position, not subjectively but objectively and in all cases. It is the automatic implication that external reality exists as the realm of truth. To state anything or to ask a question is automatically asserting that truth exists by either stating something as true or asking a question to invite or contemplate the answer, which is a truthful answer. Otherwise, there's no point in even saying or asking or even doing anything. Solipsism is the single greatest mind virus known to humanity and is spreading like a plague, largely thanks to New Age religion. The most powerful way to keep people cut off from truth and knowledge is to convince you that they don't exist. And if people don't have knowledge, they don't have freedom. This is the most powerful form of mind control. The spiritual experience is foundationally based upon the prime concept of self-ownership, the simple and fundamental truth that you are the sole steward and benefactor of your body, your mind, and your freedom to exist and interact in the world over which you alone hold rightful authority. This idea must first be understood psychologically, but also embodied and actively applied to one's state of existence in order to be fully realized. Self-ownership can be qualified through the concepts of autonomy and sovereignty as the internal and external expressions of it. Autonomy is defined as the state, power, or right of self-government, the self-directing freedom, and especially moral independence. Very key, that moral aspect there. It means independent, living one's own laws. The doctrine of the will giving itself its own law based on conscience. Autonomy is essentially your right to freedom. Any action that does not initiate harm is a freedom, and personal boundaries as an extension of self-ownership. To be sovereign comes from two words in Latin, super, which means above, beyond, or over, and regnum, reign, which means to rule or govern. So sovereignty means you are beyond or above external rulership or government. It is an extension of your autonomy, which states that your boundaries and right to self-rulership are valid and sacred and should not be infringed. Your sovereignty is quantified by your spoken or unspoken consent. So, autonomy affirms your inherent right to freedom and self-rulership, and sovereignty negates the right of any external force from infringing on your freedom or attempting to rule over you. So these two terms come down to the simple idea that you own yourself and no one else owns you. And naturally, you do not have the right to take any action which violates the autonomy and sovereignty of another person. Such an action would be a performative contradiction and hypocrisy, since it's impossible to consent to having your consent violated. You would be doing something to someone else that you would not want done to you. Autonomy and sovereignty are not conditions which are granted or bestowed by any person or institution. They are inalienable rights which are inherent to your being by nature and birthright. They can never be given or taken away, only violated, ignored, and neglected. Autonomy and sovereignty are the internal and external expressions of self-ownership and correspond to the non-aggression and self-defense principles. A sovereignty violation to another is abuse of their autonomy. Therefore, a being should apply the non-aggression principle to their own autonomy, in other words, not using your self-rulership to initiate harm, so as not to infringe on the sovereignty of others. And a being should exercise the self-defense principle to protect their own sovereignty, should someone else choose to abuse their autonomy. A sovereignty violation is a performative claim of ownership over another. That is, they are acting as if the other or their property is their own property to do with what they wish, against their consent or will. They are taking an action which is not a right, that which does not initiate harm, and therefore a wrong. Slavery is the ownership of another human being and their property. This includes their body, their mind, their possessions, and the fruits of their labor. Slavery is the current condition which humanity is in. This is mostly due to the systems of control which operate entirely through means of violence and coercion. Such violations are an inherent claim of ownership upon its victims and a violation of their free will. Therefore, the system is one of slavery. It does not matter if these conditions are covert or overt, their methods euphemized and rationalized. Physical slavery is an objective condition that exists when the previously defined requirements are met. There are two forms of slavery, overt and covert, as I said. Overt slavery is what most people imagine when the subject is brought up to them. Shackles, whips, toiling in the fields, etc. But slavery has evolved, become more advanced in the covert form. This is a much more effective method where its victims believe that they are free, do not realize they are slaves, or worse yet, believe that their slavery is rightful and legitimate. Slavery begins in the mind. Once an individual realizes their sovereignty and autonomy and mentally reclaims it, they are no longer a slave, even if they are physically coerced, harmed, or even killed. Therefore, the mind is the ultimate battleground for control, via the slave system. In order to actualize and exercise self-ownership, one must be able to identify and understand the borders of your own state of being, where you begin and where you end. As an extension of self, your boundaries are simply the borders which determine the jurisdiction of your domain of authority, that which is and isn't yours to govern and control. That's where the ego comes in. The ego is simply one's own sense of self. It is your mental construct of the spatial or physical and identity, which is psychological, aspects of who you are, and by apophysis, who you are not. It is important to note that the ego is your own mental conception of yourself, not the actuality of who you are. This conception can be accurate, or it can be distorted and wildly illusory. Perception and reality are two separate concepts which can closely align or drastically differ. The ego operates from the reptilian brain and left hemisphere. Its primary purpose is survival. It is a useful and powerful ally and is an integral part of you and your mind. It is not your enemy. There is so much demonization of the ego going on, again, especially thanks to the New Age, and this shows such a lack of understanding of psychology and spiritual philosophy. The ego is simply wounded and needs to be healed, balanced, and integrated, not destroyed. Such an endeavor to kill the ego is right brain imbalance, New Age nonsense, and not only highly unhealthy, but impossible and asinine. A healthy ego is a healthy, balanced, and integrated sense of self. An unhealthy ego is a self-conception which is either overinflated or diminished. This manifests behaviorally as either a domineering, narcissistic personality type or the passive submissive type, both of which lack healthy boundaries. So without the ego, you have no boundaries, or your boundaries are way extended out further than they should be. So the triad, the trinity, and the trivium are all three-tiered feedback loops, which have direct internal and external correspondence to one another. They are syncretic and complementary. Essentially, they're the same system, just from different paradigms, and they overlap perfectly. Together, they are what create the conditions of our world, as individuals and collectively in the aggregate. So, this is the mind, body, spirit triad. The body, as you see here with the blade symbol, represents the physical realm where the body exists. The blade is a masculine symbol, as you remember from the previous slides. Above that is the mental realm. Above that is the spiritual realm, represented by the feminine. This is called the chalice. So the blade and the chalice. So the body is masculine, the spirit is feminine. That's why men are physically strong, right? They're externally oriented. The feminine is more spiritual. This is why there's much more female like psychics, and they're just very connected to the spiritual realm. So this triad is the internal correspondence, but objective, and this will make more sense in a minute when I explain the other systems, but just remember, this is internal correspondence, but the objective form. The mental level is the connection between the body and the spirit. It is the bridge between the two. If the mind is healthy and functioning optimally, there will be a powerful connection between body and spirit. If the mind is in chaos and disorder or hijacked, this connection is severed. This is yet another reason why the mind is targeted so heavily. It is the cornerstone and seat of consciousness that, when hijacked, cuts the body, the vehicle that is capable of taking action and creating change, off from the spirit, which is the higher guiding force. Now let's talk about the Trinity. This is the internal correspondence, but the subjective aspect. So you have thoughts, which is mind, truth, and the Father. Emotions, which is spirit, internal, care, mother, and feminine. Actions, which is the body, external, sun, will, and courage, and masculine. And these three things combined form your integrity, triune alignment. And this is family, unity, right? Internal correspondence. Thoughts, emotions, and actions are the subjective, internal components of your consciousness that form your integrity, the alignment of all three. Your integrity reforms by confirming or challenging the thoughts you have about yourself. This is called the identity feedback loop. So your thoughts dictate your emotions, and how you think and feel dictate your actions. And then this creates your state of integrity, which then loops back and affects the thoughts that you have about yourself. Now you have the trivium. This is the third and final part of this three-part system. The trivium is holistic correspondence, meaning there is an internal and external component, and it is objective subjective, meaning it combines both. So this is like the master system that incorporates all of it. And this system is what creates change in the reality field. This is how we as consciousnesses affect and create outcomes in the world that we live in. So the base of this pyramid is knowledge. This is your perception of yourself and reality, the information that you have. Based on your knowledge, you take that in, and that creates understanding. This is your conception of self and reality, right? This is your processing and integration of knowledge. And your understanding is only as good as the information, the knowledge that you have. And the wisdom is the actuation of self and reality, or the application of knowledge, and is only as good as your decision making. And then you have the resulted outcome. This is the reflection of self and reality, the verification of knowledge, and the outcome is only as good as the actions you took. So you have the information, the choice internally, the behavior externally, and then the results. So perception, conception, actuation, and reflection. Because the outcome reforms, that is, confirms or challenges the knowledge you have about reality, external, and this creates the worldview feedback loop, because that outcome then comes back taken in as information through your experience. And this is it's a looping cycle. It's a process. So hopefully that makes sense. So to tie it all together, you have truth. Your thoughts are based on knowledge, which are born of universal truth. So see how this all stacks together, just like the pyramid here. Each of these systems all stack together to form this master system. You know, your thoughts are based on knowledge, born of universal truth. This is the external correspondence of knowledge. Knowledge is internal, truth is external. Then you have your emotions, or what you care about, are based on your understanding, born of universal love. So emotions are the internal aspect of external cosmic love. And then your actions, which is based on will and courage, are based on the application of wisdom and born of the universal higher will. And then again, reality itself, this is the fully external cosmic correspondence. The reality itself is the cosmic mirror. It is nature itself and is ruled by and operates via natural law. So we are interacting with reality through the laws of nature that are giving us the outcomes that come back and they feed us truth through our experience. And then this cycle continues on and on and on as we are in this feedback loop of experience. These three concepts combined form the master system in which consciousness navigates and shapes the reality field while incarnated in the spiritual experience. All right, let's talk about trauma. So, trauma is defined as an event or action resulting in severe psychological, emotional, or physical harm, or a disordered psychic or behavioral state resulting from severe mental or emotional stress or physical injury. So it is both the thing that causes the harm and the state caused by the harm. Trauma is the Greek word for wound. So it is a psychological, emotional, or physical wound. Put another way, trauma can be defined as an experience or event that gives acute or cumulative distress to the nervous system and psyche. Trauma can manifest from an isolated event or a chronic experience, compounded over time. Trauma can be seen as a form of energetic or physical rape, an unwanted and harmful penetration of your boundaries, of your personhood, a violation of your sovereignty and autonomy. This disrupts, fractures, and distorts your sense of self, and your ego will have a threefold reaction to it: a fracturing, disruption, and confusion of your identity, a compensation of either an overinflation or a diminishment of your perceived boundaries, your sense of self, and your self-worth, so one or the other, and a distorted or negative perception of reality. Violence and coercion are forms of sovereignty violation. When you are violated against your will, this is a traumatic experience and creates lasting psychological effects known as post-traumatic stress disorder and psychosis. Their severity will be relative to the degree of severity of the trauma. Complex PTSD is caused by sustained trauma compounded over time. So, trauma creates states of imbalance and pushes a mind to be dominant to one side or the other. We spoke earlier about what are the results of left or right brain imbalance. So this creates either master or slave mentality. This means that everyone who is victimized will either become identified as the victim or identify with and become the abuser and become locked into that mindset until actual healing occurs. Victims of trauma are known to be trapped in the memory and doomed to continue repeating that event on loop until the trauma is resolved. Those of you who are familiar with Dr. Joe Dispenza, this is exactly what he talks about. So it could be said that they are role-playing that initial event as they continue to relive it again and again as either the victim or the abuser. So again, here you have the traumatic or chronic abuse occurs, then that pushes them into one of two pathways. Either the experiencer identifies with the abuser, the negative emotions turn outward, the experiencer becomes the abuser, the experiencer then abuses others and or themselves. If the experiencer becomes identified with the victim, those negative emotions turn inward. Again, this theme of internal and external correspondence. This is a very important natural law. The experiencer becomes the victim and then is victimized by others and abuses themselves. The only way out of this cycle is to heal through applied knowledge, care, and will. And shout out to Brandon Martin for this awesome graphic. So, we're dealing with a perpetual cycle of trauma and abuse. Abuse causes trauma, which results in further abuse, either to self or others, or both, and on it goes. So, if you've ever heard the saying, hurt people hurt people. Both the abuser and victim roles are a projection of low self-worth and lack of self-respect, originating from that initial violation of autonomy. Harming others is a betrayal of self by not respecting the boundaries of others and your own honor and integrity. Allowing your self-harm is a betrayal of self by not having healthy boundaries for yourself, not saying no, and allowing this harm to happen. First, that violation creates a subconscious belief within you, either about yourself or the world. You then project that belief in how you interface internally or externally. So, if you turn it inward, first you believe that you are worthless and deserve to be abused. Then, via the trivium, that belief is aligned with actions of accepting abuse or even inviting it. If turned outward, it begins with the belief that the world is cruel and people are hostile, and therefore your actions must be hostile towards it in order to survive or exact punishment. A traumatic experience will also disrupt a person's sense of control, as the violation was a negation and domination of their control and consent. So they will also seek to overcompensate by either adopting a master or slave mentality. Meaning, they will either become overly controlling of others and their external environment, which is an obsession of control, or overly passive in what they will allow, even if harmful, a total relinquishment of control. It's a projection of the powerlessness that was imposed upon them through that trauma. Trauma also distorts your identity or your sense of self and leaves you primed to form a false identity by bonding with toxic beliefs, constructs, behaviors, and so forth to fill the void left by your psychological wounding. The entire system operates on violating your sovereignty, penetrating your boundaries. This is where all systemic trauma comes from. So then you have the master-slave dichotomy, also known as the narcissist and the martyr archetypes, or the narcissist and the empath as people often call it, which isn't my favorite terminology. So once sufficiently traumatized, most people will lean towards characteristics of one of these two archetypes. That is not to say that everyone is classified as a fully fledged one or the other, nor is it to say that an individual must be exclusively one or the other, or cannot possess traits of both archetypes. There is often much interplay or overlap between the two. They are simply useful concepts to observe this psychological dialectic. Psychopathy is not a natural state of human being, any more than cancer or infection. Most people are not primary psychopaths, so most abusers are also under mind control as well. This doesn't excuse their behavior, but it does help us to understand how such horrors can be committed by normal, everyday people. Also, most abuser types in positions of authority within the system are slaves themselves. Slaves to those up the chain of command, and slaves to the mind control, to their pain and trauma. It is a never-ending feedback loop. So let us quickly look at the master versus the slave type personalities. If a person is left brain dominant, they take on toxic masculine traits. They are exteroceptive, meaning their perception is biased towards externally. They project their self-loathing outwardly. They're domineering, narcissistic, radically self-centered, lacks empathy, remorse, or guilt, hyperlogical, apathetic, void of care, doesn't respect, no, very tyrannical, only concerned with their own needs, desires, boundaries, no respect for others, insensitive, machine-like, and detached, can never acknowledge or admit faults, unapologetic. They hold grandiose ideas about themselves, delusions of grandeur and God complex, and they're authoritarian, they're the punisher and savior archetypes mentally. The right brain dominant person is going to exhibit toxic feminine traits. They are interoceptive, hypersensitive. They project their self-loathing inwardly. They're submissive, supplicating, selfless, people pleaser, irrational, cares too much, can't say no, a doormat. They carry guilt around their own needs, desires, and boundaries, and they're hyper-focused on others. Highly empathetic, overly emotional, assumes everything is their fault, very apologetic, feels worthless, unworthy, powerless, a failure, and they adopt the victim identity or mindset or the martyr archetype. And then you have the master-slave worldviews or the external perceptions. The left brain dominant person has toxic masculine views, such as nihilism, scientism, atheism, the satanic form of solipsism, where there is only me, only I matter, authoritarian, conservative, misogynistic, and potentially racist. The right brain dominant person is going to have toxic feminine views, such as determinism, right? Everything happens for a reason. It's all, there's no such thing as coincidence. Magical thinking, religiosity, New Age mindset, the New Age form of solipsism, which is there is no me, right? I don't exist. There's no me. We're all just God experiencing each other. My ego is an illusion. There is an element of truth to it, but again, it's imbalanced. It's right brain imbalanced. There's no logical, real world type of intelligence tempering that type of mindset. They will be a willing slave. They tend to be liberal. Could be a men going their own way or a feminist, right? This is the victim story, the racism card, right? Everywhere I go, it's just racism everywhere. The same kind of thing. So trauma can have a wide range of pathological effects on individuals, and these can vary depending on the type and severity of the trauma, as well as the individual's mental fortitude, resilience, and coping skills. Some of the most common effects of trauma include PTSD. This is a mental health condition that can occur after experiencing or witnessing a traumatic event. Chronic negative emotions. Trauma can cause chronic conditions of excessive anxiety, stress, depression, or rage and agitation. Before I continue, I just want to ask you, as I'm reading these, to think about, is this the common state of most people in some way or another? Do we have an epidemic of chronic negative emotions, anxiety, stress, depression, rage, agitation? Emotional volatility. Experience sudden or chronic changes in their emotionality or mood. Triggered, right? The triggered meme, the snowflakes, right? Self-harm. Engage in self-harm behaviors as a way to cope with the distress associated with their condition. And this isn't just cutting yourself with a razor blade. This is smoking, drinking, toxic food, any other sort of harmful behavior that is normalized in society. Suicidal thoughts or attempts. Physical symptoms such as headaches, fatigue, gastrointestinal issues, addictions, Some individuals may turn to escapes, pleasures, drugs, or alcohol as a way to cope with the emotional pain caused by trauma. Interpersonal difficulties. Trauma can impact an individual's ability to form and maintain relationships with others. You have ghosting, right? You have people betraying each other, stabbing each other in the back all the time. Now, it's extremely important to consider, when considering these extreme cases and disorders caused by severe trauma, consider that there is most likely some subtle version of nearly all of these going on due to the chronic and compounding effects of widespread systemic and societal trauma. So while the average person may not be some extreme case of PTSD, psychosis, or dissociative disorder, there are traces of all these symptoms evident in differing ways in nearly every person, especially those with no self-awareness or commitment to self-improvement or healing. We can enhance our self-awareness of these subtle symptoms and signs by observing the acute and exaggerated forms of these conditions to show us what they look like and then identify them in a much more subtle form. Psychosis is a severe mental disorder characterized by a loss of contact with reality. People experiencing psychosis may have false beliefs or delusions. They may also have disordered thoughts, speech, and behavior, and may struggle to form coherent thoughts or communicate effectively with others. Any of this sound familiar? Psychosis can be a symptom of various mental health conditions, including schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, severe depression, or substance abuse. Trauma can trigger or exacerbate these symptoms, especially in individuals with an underlying vulnerability to psychosis. Dissociation is a psychological experience where an individual's thoughts, feelings, and behaviors become disconnected from one another. It is a coping mechanism that helps the individual detach from the traumatic experiences which can be too overwhelming to process at the time. Dissociative identity disorder, formerly known as multiple personality disorder, is a mental health condition in which a person's identity is fragmented, resulting in two or more distinct personality states or identities. These identities can take control of an individual's behavior and thoughts and may emerge in response to stress or trauma. So what happens when we live in a constant state of stress or trauma? DID is thought to be caused by severe and repeated trauma via physical, sexual, or emotional abuse. The symptoms of DID can be diverse and vary greatly from person to person, but some of the common sides include, and tell me if these seem increasingly common in people: altered states of consciousness, experience dissociative states during which they may feel disconnected from their surroundings or sense that their environment is unreal. Think about hologram theory. Oh, reality is an illusion. Nothing is real. There's no truth. Positive vibes only. Depersonalization, feeling detached from themselves or their own body as if they are observing themselves from the outside. Identity confusion, struggle with a sense of identity or confusion about who they are, or may experience sudden shifts in their self-concept. Gender fluidity, anyone? Right? Or transgender? This is all identity crisis. Multiple personalities. Sometimes a person's sense of self becomes so disrupted and agitated, they psychologically dissociate and cease to be themselves entirely or develop multiple selves. They, them, NPCs, right? Agents of the Matrix, basically. And you have the four basic responses to trauma: fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. Fight is the dominant and aggressive and controlling approach. This is the masculine and active. Flight is avoidance and ignoring. This is neutral and passive, or gender neutral and passive. Freeze, which is submissive, compliant, non-confrontational. This is feminine, passive. And fawn, which is Stockholm syndrome, supplication, codependence, which is gender neutral, and active. Now, origins of trauma and abuse can be placed into two different categories, what I call vertical and horizontal trauma. Vertical trauma, or top-down trauma, is trauma which comes from the control system itself, the institutions and societal structures. This trauma tends to be rooted in authority or coercive hierarchy, hence top-down. Horizontal trauma is lateral trauma, which happens between individuals at the parallel level. This trauma is generally incited through interrelational abuse, petty crime, and collectively through culture. Culture often uses covert coercion via shame, guilt, ostracization, ridicule, virtue signaling, and appeal to authority. Top-down trauma is disseminated down and propagates at each level horizontally, then carried further along down the pyramid, and often leaks back upwards as well. This dynamic creates a perpetual feedback loop of trauma and abuse, which propagates and reinforces itself multilaterally, up and down, side to side. So this is a visual diagram of the control system. At the top, you have the Council of 13. You can look that up and research all about that. These are the ultra elites. And then you have the elite families, the Rothschilds, the Saxe-Coburg, things like that. Then you have the think tanks, United Nations, Bilderberg, the World Economic Forum, Council of Foreign Relations, the World Health Organization. There are many. Then you have the financial control system, the IRS, the central banks, the IMF, interest revenue. Then you have the corporations. They control the resources, consumerism, technology, and they have lobbyists that control the government. That's where you get to the population control layer. This is religion, government, media, science, education, and then at the bottom, you have the working class, or the slave class, basically. Another way to look at this top-down trauma cycle is the societal hierarchy structure. Religion is the sky daddy, right? The heavenly father. Government is the earth daddy, the earthly parental proxy. And back in the day, you had the divine right to rule. So all government power came from supposed divine ordainment. And then you have the institutions, then you have culture, the invisible layer, and then parents, and then children. So this all stacks on top. So children are some of the most subjugated beings on the planet, unfortunately. So you have children who grow up to become adults and may potentially become abusive parents, criminals, or join into the institutions, military, police, government, and the cycle continues, all while often believing that they are acting as a force of good. This is the cycle of mass mind control. Trauma is pushed down, initiated and pushed down the pyramid from above by intentional design from the social engineers. This psychosis then spreads and is perpetually propagated further amongst the victims. This is similar to how parental abuse begins the cycle of trauma and abuse, and the child then becomes violent towards siblings, other peers at school, animals, back at the parents, etc. Another example you could look at is the gender war, right? You've got all this media propaganda, hormonal disruption, right? Chemical warfare, legislation, anti-male, anti-female legislation, and general trauma. That's the systemic sources of gender trauma. Then you have it playing out in relationships. Gender polarity, roles get reversed, inverted, causing more trauma and inversion, right? Because then it's self-perpetuating. You have abuse that goes on. Then this experience propagates and corroborates the story of negative assumptions or judgments of, and then they act on that. Men might become police who harass women, or a politician or voter who goes against abortion or voting rights for women. I'm not saying I'm pro-abortion. I'm saying this is their way of taking it out on women. They're going to subjugate them using the system now. The women might become a feminist, promote anti-male legislation, exploit the custody courts, and continue to consume misogynistic media. And so it just continues the cycle of abuse. So the system then uses this chaos to justify its own existence and power, and tighten its grip of domination. Fear, violence, and suffering is the fuel of the slave system. The system generally uses much more overt violence and coercion due to its erroneous assertion that it has special rights that normal people do not possess. Of course, overt violence still happens horizontally, but the system has authorized, legitimized, and legalized its abuse. Therefore, it is much more normalized and destigmatized. There is often much overlap between the two, then the lines are somewhat ambiguous. Religion, for example, is both institutional and cultural. Ultimately, even those involved in government, police, schools, media, are still members of society with a childhood story, friends, family, etc. They're just people. And though they're using the apparatuses of the system to inflict harm, often unintentionally, they are still doing so to their fellow citizens, to their fellow human beings. So these are useful ideas to conceptualize, but they're not mutually exclusive. So some examples of vertical trauma would be government, obviously, via taxation, laws, lockdowns, licensing, regulation, routine traffic stops, child services, spying, surveillance, censorship, incarceration, interrogation, war. Basically all the stuff that is criminality to the normal person, but it's all just perfectly business as usual. Then you have religion, original sin, hell, Satan, demons, apocalypse, rapture. Then you have the media, using distortion, manipulation, Pavlovian programming, news, fear-mongering, misinformation, propaganda, gaslighting. You have false flags that are shootings and terrorist attacks, income-based existence, constantly being in fear of how you're going to pay your rent, healthcare, a whole trauma system of its own, especially for childbirth, and public schools. And these are just a few. Horizontal trauma, some examples are authoritarian parenting, especially spanking and circumcision, parental and domestic abuse, abandonment, neglect. Then you have murder, rape or sexual abuse, physical assault, theft, vandalism, breaking and entering, deception, bullying, harassment, political fanaticism, social media, racism, sexism, scams and frauds, custody wars, road rage, social and corporate Darwinism, gang culture, cancel culture. I could spend hours just unpacking all of these. I invite you to really just kind of think about this and contemplate it yourself. And obviously, these are just a few of the most prominent ones, but there are many more. And these cycles of trauma and abuse have been going on for eons. This psychic energy is carried and passed down through generations via Akashic memory and epigenetics. This trauma is always beneath the surface, within the subconscious mind, waiting to be activated. Ancestral trauma is an important component of mind control and is often exploited to manipulate and influence people subconsciously. For example, the use of Norse symbolism and runes on the Germanic people of Prussia and Nazi Germany. In the days of our pagan ancestors, the transmutation of drama used to be enacted through ritual and made conscious. Celestial events and mythological interplay were dramatized, festivals held to mark solar and lunar dates, etc., and this kept us conscious and above the trauma. the cycles were brought to the surface. The dark occultists have cut us off from nature and our ancestral roots and traditions. Since we've lost our rituals, the trauma remains trapped in the subconscious mind. Enlightening drama turned into destructive trauma. Trauma bonding, also referred to as Stockholm Syndrome, is a psychological phenomenon in which a victim develops a bond with their abuser. This can manifest as feelings of emotional attachment, positive sentiment, affection, and/or loyalty towards them. This can occur in any type of abusive relationship, whether it is physical, emotional, or psychological abuse. The term Stockholm Syndrome originated during the 1970s when several of the hostages of the Norrmalmstorg bank robbery that occurred in Stockholm, Sweden, developed positive feelings towards the robbers. Over time, this trauma can create a bond between victim and the abuser. As the victim begins to rely on the abuser for validation, approval, and even their sense of self-worth. The victim may also feel guilt or shame about the abuse, or fear that they will not be able to cope without the abuser. In some cases, the victim may even defend the abuser or blame themselves for the abuse. Another important aspect of Stockholm Syndrome is that not only do the victims develop a positive bond with their captors, but negative feelings towards those trying to save them, i.e., law enforcement in hostage situations or friends encouraging a battered wife to leave her husband. So what does this tell you about the typical attitude and response you get from those who are hopelessly enslaved and dependent on the system when you try to explain the nature of their captivity, the corruption, and are met with malice and contempt, all while praising the psychopaths in power? This phenomenon is a survival response and coping mechanism that compels the victim to identify with the abuser and minimize the threat they pose. The most likely reasons are fear. The victim may be afraid of the consequences of non-compliance or attempting to escape. They're being held without their consent, and the mind can convince itself that it's what they actually wanted anyway. The victim may also try to find ways to please the abuser or minimize the abuse in order to reduce their own suffering, as well as helplessness. The victim feels powerless to the dominance of their abusers. Therefore, they find security and comfort in developing a relationship with them. Trauma bonding is nearly always used to describe the bond between victim and abuser, but I have expanded the concept to include that it can also develop towards an idea, belief, institution, or any other construct of one's own identity. Another way to frame this is that a traumatized person will identify and bond with anything or anyone that can fill in the holes of their gaping psychological wounds and damaged sense of self. It acts as a proxy for their true identity and healthy, authentic connection with themselves and others and activities and behaviors. People cling to their beliefs and embrace dogmatic thinking because they've bonded and identified with their poisoned worldviews, toxic habits and cultures, as well as their abusers and those who otherwise keep the system going. They form a codependent relationship with these constructs, trying desperately to use them as a proxy for their own fractured identity. Much like an addiction, it is an attempt to use these constructs to give them a sense of wholeness they lack due to their trauma. Breaking a trauma bond can be extremely difficult, since the victim may be afraid of their ability to cope without the relationship. They may even have trouble recognizing the abusive nature of their relationship or making the decision to leave the abusive situation. It is worth noting that trauma bonding works both ways. The abuser can be just as codependent with their victims, give them a sense of wholeness to maintain control over someone else. Because they have such a lack of internal power and self-control, they're outsourcing that power deficit. And remember, again, that behavior is highly based upon one's identity. If you can artificially implant an identity within a mind, they will act accordingly and believe that it is actually who they are. We can choose to use our growing knowledge to enslave people in ways never dreamed of before, depersonalizing them, controlling them by means so carefully selected that they will perhaps never be aware of their loss of personhood. So let's quickly look at some of the most common identity constructs. You have worldviews, which is external. Misanthropism, which means hating humankind, thinking humans are a scourge on this planet and things like that. Or philanthropism, in other words, thinking, oh, people are inherently good. Both of those are imbalanced, partially true, partially untrue perspectives. Overpopulation and therefore eugenics, right? There's too many people. We need to population control. Things like racism, conspiracy mindset, right? Everything's conspiracy. Nihilism, life is meaningless, empty. There's no purpose to humans, things like that. Self-views that are internal, for example, original sin or self-loathing. The victim mindset, savior or God complex, delusions of grandeur, etc. Alternate identities, right? Transgender, I am this, but I feel like this. My identity is not matching. Transracial, transspecies, adult baby syndrome. This is a real thing that, I'm sure you've seen on TikTok, like fully grown adults that like to role play and wear diapers and political parties or ideologies. That goes without saying. Religious or spiritual beliefs, nationality or ethnicity, your race, where you're from, culture, your identity, career, doctor, engineer, artist, things like that. Socioeconomic status, your money, your fame, your status. Social causes or movements, LGBTQ plus, TRZQ, ABC, feminism, MGTOW, patriarchy, environmentalism, transhumanism. These are just a few examples of each to give you an idea. Hobbies or interests, Star Wars or Marvel or Game of Thrones, gaming, fitness, cooking, music genres or artists, the hip-hop life or metalhead or whatever it may be. Gaming platforms, artistic or creative identity, writer, painter, musician. Brands and franchises, Ford sucks, Chevy's better, this kind of just silly tribalism that you see. Fashion or clothing brands, technology or software, food or beverage brands, sports teams, car brands or models, social media platforms, educational institutions, and public figures or archetypes, celebrities, politicians, religious figures, fictional characters, cultural icons, social media influencers, artists, musicians, actors, pro athletes. These are all people that people really identify. They're looking to identify with someone that they perceive as great or, like them, but they're winning and they live vicariously through that. So there are many, many, many more. Obviously, these are just a few of the most prominent ones. And not to say that all of these are inherently bad or toxic, but many are, or at least highly co-opted, or altogether just meaningless and arbitrary to a person's true sense of self, or a form of addiction or escapism from one's reality, like video games, for example. These are generally a way to express one's values. If a person doesn't value themselves, their values will be distorted as well, and these identity constructs will reflect this. I.e., you're an alcoholic due to your self-loathing, then you become obsessed with like Jack Daniels and you get a Jack Daniels tattoo on your neck or something because that's my whiskey right there, this kind of thing. So I just encourage everyone to dig deeper, to think of more to add to this list, and truly ask yourself, why do you identify with the things that you do? it's worth just asking the question. Maybe there's nothing wrong with some things that you do. Maybe there's an opportunity to get into some underlying motives there. Now, addiction is a big one. Addictions are behaviors which satisfy some sort of compulsive need and are nearly always toxic and self-destructive. And their satiative effects are very temporary and must be habitually repeated, never actually healing the underlying cause driving the behavior. Addicts have trauma bonded with their vices. So through these behaviors, they are seeking an escape from their internal and external reality, and a temporary sense of connection, control, and completeness gives them the sense, which is like false healing, all the things the trauma took away from them. And these false identity constructs, as we just looked at, are their own form of addictions, which achieve the same effects. Psychologically, it's basically the same thing. You're just addicted to the gym or video games or a certain TV show or being this or being that, rather than your typical thought of an addiction. Addiction is at an all-time high, widespread, and most of them, in the totality of them, are normalized. So people with addictions, which is basically everyone, become extremely predictable, and they have a strong motivator which can be easily exploited. These trauma-bonded identity constructs often can be easily recognized by their rigid, religious-like dogmatic belief and attachment. People will cling to these beliefs and identities even when presented with conflicting evidence or rationale. The more identified a person is to their belief, the more desperately they will remain entrenched in it, ignoring or even attacking anything that threatens it. Dogma is a symptom of cognitive dissonance, a psychological phenomena that occurs when a person holds two or more contradictory beliefs simultaneously. When these discrepancies are exposed, the person becomes highly uncomfortable, flustered, erratic, and sometimes outright hostile. This is because they are deeply identified with that belief, identified with it. So by attacking their beliefs, they are literally incapable of distinguishing it from a personal attack on them. This may also elicit a strong feeling of insecurity as that person's identity is being challenged. You're pressing up against that trauma-bonded belief. The cracks and falsities are being exposed, and this can result in very erratic or explosive behavior and emotional outburst. This behavior is indistinguishable from that of an addict when something or someone speaks against or interferes with their habits or vices, because psychologically, this trauma bond works exactly the same way. So, some examples of cognitive dissonance might be, all politicians are scumbags, but the police and military who enforce their policies are heroes and deserve the highest respect, and they protect our freedoms, etc. Or people can't be trusted with freedom, but they can be trusted with executive governmental authority and power. What about it's wrong to lie, steal, assault, trespass, and murder unless you're the government? Humans are responsible for the fall of man via Christianity. Our sins have earned our damnation, but no amount of good works can earn you salvation. And finally, karma is real, but morality and truth are subjective. These are all contradictory beliefs. And when you point these things out, a person's going to get potentially very uncomfortable and hostile with you. In fact, I may have just triggered someone by saying those out loud. In the Matrix film, the agents are computer programs that act as enforcers within the Matrix. They are designed to maintain control over the human population that is unknowingly trapped within the Matrix. They can instantly possess the bodies of any human connected to the Matrix, allowing them to move and act within the virtual world. Their primary objective is to prevent humans from becoming aware of the true nature of the matrix, and to eliminate any individuals who pose a threat to the system. Agents are depicted as emotionless and relentless, driven solely by their mission to maintain order and suppress any signs of rebellion or awakening among the human population. Anyone can become an agent. Their trauma is the code that the agent program latches onto and transforms people into operatives for the control system. And look how quickly the C-19 rollout had this effect. People instantly became triggered out, tyrants demanding you put your mask on and comply with the lockdowns and all this kind of stuff. And if you spoke out against this, the narrative, or pointed towards where this is maybe heading, they would attack you. You have to understand, most people are not ready to be unplugged, and many of them are so inured and so hopelessly dependent on the system that they will fight to protect it. So now that we've sufficiently defined what is mind control, let's get into the mechanics of how it actually works. The foundational technique used to manipulate and control the masses is a process called trauma-based mind control. Trauma-based mind control involves the use of extreme trauma, such as physical or sexual abuse, to create a split or fracture in a person's personality. This fracture creates a blank slate that can be programmed with new beliefs, behaviors, and thought patterns. The trauma is often repeated over a long period of time and is designed to create a sense of helplessness and dependency on the victim. Once the victim's personality has been fractured, the mind controllers can then begin to program the person with new beliefs and behaviors. The goal of the programming is to create a new identity for the victim that is completely loyal to the mind controllers and is willing to do their bidding without question. This can also result in the formation of distinct, separate identities or alters, each with their own thoughts, feelings, memories, and behaviors. Individuals can also be conditioned to respond to certain triggers, such as a specific word, image, or gesture, through the use of traumatic experiences. This is believed to work by creating a strong emotional association between the trigger and the traumatic experience, which can then be used to manipulate the individual's thoughts and behaviors. Anyone who's seen the film A Clockwork Orange, this is exactly what is shown in that film. And I would say Stanley Kubrick was definitely an insider who had a lot of insight into some of the things that he put into his movies. When an individual experiences trauma, their brain releases chemicals that can create a heightened state of arousal and intense emotional responses. This heightened state can make the individual more susceptible to suggestion and manipulation, as they may be more willing to comply with the demands of the abuser in order to avoid further trauma. The effects of trauma-based mind control on its victims can be complex and long-lasting. Here are some potential effects of the psychology of its victims. Dissociation. As we talked about earlier, victims of trauma-based mind control may experience dissociation, which is a psychological coping mechanism that involves disconnecting from one's thoughts, feelings, and memories. This can result in a sense of detachment or numbness and can make it difficult for the individual to connect with others or form meaningful relationships. Identity issues. Trauma-based mind control can also cause identity issues, as the individual may have difficulty separating their own thoughts and beliefs from those imposed upon them through the trauma. This can result in confusion or a sense of lost identity, and PTSD, depression, and anxiety. The steps of trauma-based mind control are as follows. Breaking down the individual's sense of self and identity. This may involve subjecting the individual to extreme forms of physical and emotional abuse, such as sleep deprivation, sensory deprivation, forced isolation, and humiliation, in order to break down their sense of self and weaken their resistance to the abuser's influence. Creating intense emotional states. The abuser may subject the individual to extreme emotional states such as fear, guilt, shame, and rage in order to induce a state of emotional overload and disorientation, introducing new beliefs and values. The abuser may introduce new beliefs, values, and ideologies and reinforce these through rewards and punishments. This may involve indoctrinating the individual with a specific worldview, often involving beliefs in a higher power or authority figure. Controlling the individual's behavior. The abuser may use a range of techniques to control the individual's behavior, including punishment for disobedience and rewards for compliance, such as food, shelter, and basic needs. The abuser may also use a range of tactics to monitor the individual's behavior, such as surveillance, mind games, and hypnosis. And creating dissociative states. The abuser may use a range of techniques to induce dissociative states such as trance induction, hypnosis, and sensory deprivation in order to create a state of altered consciousness in the individual. So you have coercion resulting in trauma, then the programs, and then the triggers, the predictable outcome. For mind control to be effective, the perpetrators must achieve one or both of two objectives. Free will hacking. Surreptitiously hijack your free will so that you unwittingly make the choices they want you to, or demoralization. Erode and diminish your self-worth so severely that you become a willing slave. They would prefer the second option, but if that fails, they will take the first one or some combination of the two. There are two mental constructs that compel human behavior: identity and worldview. Again, internal and external correspondence. This means your conceptual ideas about yourself and your axioms held about the conditions, rules, and probable outcomes of reality. Your free will choices will be nearly entirely based on these two concepts. If both aspects can be hacked and manipulated, one can completely control the behavior of a human being externally. Trauma, especially compounded trauma, experienced over time, erodes and breaks down the identity of an individual and demoralizes them. This is the state where a person is most susceptible to mind control. Their mind is broken down and ready to have malware installed. Trauma and coercion till the soil of the garden of your mind, priming it for the planting of the seeds of programming and mind control. The functions of mind control are to diminish your self-worth and compel you to capitulate and abdicate your power and authority, and trauma bond to false identities which result in predictable and easily manipulated behaviors. We act and behave in alignment with who we think we are, who we are identified as. Now, this concept actually I first saw in a billboard that I kept passing on the roads, and I would just scoff every time I saw it, but I think it makes a perfect depiction of a cult initiation through this process of mind control. So it's called the ABCs of salvation, but I'm calling it the ABCs of cult initiation because it goes like this. A is admit you're a sinner, B is believe Jesus is Lord, and C, call upon his name. So this is how you're saved, right? You're saved. So first, admit you're a sinner. This is the concept of original sin. It's an internal belief of inherent brokenness based on guilt, self-loathing, powerlessness, helplessness, and subjugation. Then believe in him. This is idolization. This is your external belief of this being or an entity that represents perfection, grace, worship, and omnipotence. You're powerless. They have all the power, and they will be your savior. This is idolatry. And then finally, To complete the trauma bond, you call on his name. Appeal to authority, and this is the trauma bond that brings about codependence, abdication of autonomy, and proxy of governance, right? You don't own yourself, now you're giving that out to the Sky Daddy. So a summary of this process could go like this. The trauma first, then indoctrination, then subjugation, then the externalization of power, and then the result being obedience or compliance. Mind control plays into our poisoned worldview created by trauma and propaganda. By exploiting this external view, we then accept toxic beliefs about ourselves, which forms a false identity by which we operate in the world. Let's use Christianity as an example. First, we're told to accept that the world is run by Satan. We must accept the concept of original sin and the idea that we are sinners. Satan has power over us, right? We have no power. Satan has power over us. That's why we're sinners. Once this belief is accepted, we will then be willing to give our power and sovereignty to an external entity, in this case Jesus, and beg for salvation. Well, I'd much rather let Jesus and Yahweh have power over me than Satan. The belief in government also has its own version of original sin. First, we must accept the belief that humans, ourselves included, are inherently evil and dangerous and cannot be trusted with freedom. Once we accept this belief, we'll accept and condone our own enslavement and subjugation in the name of law and order. The system exploits your poisoned world and self-view. It relies on you projecting your internal pain outwardly into the world. This is what makes people cheer when cops kill an unarmed person simply for not complying, hating other races or genders, starting a war in a foreign land, or voting on insane laws. It exploits your fear of others, personal responsibilities, objective truth, and the fear of freedom itself. It projects that internal self-hatred outwards towards others or inwardly toward yourself. They want people to adopt the mindset of accepting and condoning violence because it perpetuates the multilateral cycle of abuse to continue, which enables the susceptibility and viability to mind control. The more trauma, the more drama. The more drama, the more trauma. The system legitimizes and justifies itself through chaos. Without it, it would have no purpose. So perpetrating crime and disorder is literally essential to its survival. Free will is your inalienable right to make choices as a spiritual being, occupying a physical body. It is the essential component to your autonomy, self-ownership, and rulership. It is the random component of the universe. It is inescapable and ultimately cannot be overridden. To maintain dominion over the population, they must stifle or hijack it. That's why they use trauma, because it keeps people locked in their predictable, programmed response, rather than exercising their heart-based, holistic intelligence that leads to higher consciousness, free will expression. Your consent and free will are the biggest obstacles for ensuring effective mind control. So long as a person is standing in their power and self-worth and ready to say no, that person cannot be controlled. The most common way people give up their power is by thinking they don't have any. Manufactured consent is a concept based on the fact that consent or agreement for certain agendas is not always naturally or freely given, but rather must be constructed or engineered through various means of persuasion, manipulation, and information control. The goal is to shape public perception and align it with the interest and agendas of those in power. The concept highlights the role of mass media in influencing public opinion. It argues that the media, which is mostly controlled by a small number of corporations, serve as a powerful tool to disseminate information, slant issues, and set the agenda for public discourse. Through selective reporting, biased framing, and the promotion of specific narratives, the media can shape public opinion and manipulate consent without overt coercion. Manufactured consent also emphasizes the role of propaganda and persuasion techniques employed by governments, political campaigns, and other influential entities. This may involve the use of advertising, public relations, false flags, and other forms of strategic communication to mold public perception and shape attitudes towards certain policies or actions. The Milgram experiment was a famous psychological study conducted by Stanley Milgram in the 1960s. The experiment aimed to investigate how far people would be willing to obey authority figures, even if doing so involved harming another person. The study involved a participant, the teacher, who was instructed to administer electric shocks to another person, the learner, whenever they gave a wrong answer to a question. The teacher was told that the shocks were real and could potentially be fatal, although in reality no shocks were actually given. The learner was an actor working with the experimenter and pretended to be shocked by the electric current, and in some cases pretended to be killed by the simulated shocks. The study found that a disturbingly high percentage of participants were willing to administer what they believed to be dangerous or lethal shocks to the learner, simply because they were following the instructions of a perceived authority. The study demonstrated the power of authority and obedience, and the potential for individuals to commit heinous acts they would not normally do under different circumstances. The Stanford prison experiment, which was conducted in 1971 by psychologist Philip Zimbardo, was designed to investigate how individuals respond to the roles of prisoner and guard in a simulated prison environment. Zimbardo and his team selected 24 male college students and randomly assigned them to be either prisoners or guards. The prison was set up in the basement of the Stanford Psychology Department and was designed to be as realistic as possible. The guards were given no training and were left to create their own rules and procedures. Within a few days, the guards became increasingly authoritarian and abusive, using psychological and physical methods to control and humiliate the prisoners. The prisoners, in turn, became passive and submissive, and some even developed psychological symptoms such as extreme anxiety and depression. The experiment was originally scheduled to last for 2 weeks, but was terminated after only 6 days due to the extreme and dangerous behavior of the guards and mental distress of the prisoners. These two experiments give us two disturbing yet profound revelations. One, that humans will go to great lengths to obey and submit to a perceived authority, especially when that figure is using coercion. And two, that individuals placed in positions of authority are rapidly corrupted and begin to abuse such power. These experiments are an exemplary demonstration of the master-slave dichotomy. Domestication is a process by which animals are bred and raised under certain processes in order to create a population with particular traits, dispositions, and behavioral tendencies. This can easily be applied to humans, a process also known as social engineering. The process can be seen as a kind of socialization in which individuals are removed and cut off from their natural environment. They are then taught, or rather conditioned, with the norms, values, and behaviors that are considered acceptable within their society or culture. This can take many forms, from parental discipline and education to religious or political indoctrination, media messaging, and peer pressure, as well as epigenetics and eugenics. It is not to say that humans are simply animals or are no different from animals. But as we learned earlier, Trauma shuts down the human parts of the brain and keeps the animalistic tiers of brain function in charge. This is why trauma is an essential ingredient to the sinister recipe of mind control. When kept suppressed and cut off from the higher intelligence, the primal, programmable parts of the mind become active, open, and receptive to manipulation and domestication. The goal of domestication is to produce a population that is well adapted to its artificial environment and able to function within the social structures and expectations of its society or culture. In short, the goal of domestication is to socially engineer a perfected population of slaves. These dark occultists who shape society see the human population as their rightful property to manage, manipulate, and engineer as they see fit, like livestock. We are living on one big, free-range human farm. The basic steps of domestication involve a process by which animals or humans are conditioned to become more compliant and adaptable to the needs and desires of their owners. Domestication typically involves several stages: selection, controlled breeding, socialization, institutionalization, reproduction, and distribution. The process of domestication begins with the selection of individual animals or humans that exhibit traits that are desirable for domestication. These traits can include docility, tameness, and a willingness to adapt to human environments. Once desirable individuals have been identified, they are bred selectively to create a population of animals or humans that exhibit the desired traits. Over time, these traits become more pronounced and genetically ingrained in the population. That is to say, epi-eugenics or epidysgenics. Socialization. Domesticated animals and humans must be socialized to the expectations of their human counterparts. This can involve teaching them specific behaviors, reinforcing positive behaviors, and punishing negative behaviors. Domestication often involves the creation of institutional structures such as farms, factories, or schools that are designed to reinforce the socialization process. These institutions provide a controlled environment in which domesticated animals and humans can be trained and conditioned to conform to human expectations. Finally, domesticated animals and humans are bred and distributed for various purposes such as labor, finances, invention and innovation, and other functions which ultimately serve their owners. These animals and humans are expected to conform to the norms and expectations of their human counterparts, and in turn, humans provide for their basic needs. Ultimately, domestication is a process by which humans are bred, trained, and conditioned to conform to their owners' expectations and needs in order to serve and power the control system. Its subjects become highly codependent on their owners, relying on them for their basic needs and instruction on every aspect of their behavior. Consequently, the result is a state of learned helplessness, complacency, and a complete disempowerment and subjugation. So let's take a look at the primary methods of mind control. There are many different methods and techniques of mind control. Some are forms of abuse, others of manipulation and control, or a combination of both. They are not all utilized in all cases, but are used in many different combinations and intensities. Think of them like the tools of a surgeon. They each have their purpose and place. Many of these techniques can be observed to very extreme degrees in these historic examples, such as cults, kidnappings, hostage situations, and the like. But when propagating these chronically and on a mass scale, they can be much more subtle and difficult to detect and pinpoint, especially when we're being gaslighted into thinking mind control isn't even real. But as with many things, looking at the extreme cases can help amplify and identify these aspects in their much more subtle expressions. These tactics all are either a source of trauma or exploitation of pre-existing trauma, whether small or large, which has a cumulative and synergistic effect of inducing and advancing psychosis and other pathological conditions conducive to the process. So, one method of mind control is the use and exploitation of primal motivators of fear and desire. This is acted out through reward and punishment, and these are two sides of the same coin: the desire to avoid pain and the fear of not getting what we desire. A person with a distorted sense of identity and self-worth will have strong desires around things which will elevate or validate that self-image. A core aspect of mind control is the use of fear. Humans will go to far greater lengths to avoid pain than to gain pleasure. Fear is the most powerful motivator of behavior. So, the primary primal desires are survival, power, money, status, convenience, security, freedom, connection, pleasure, desirability, worthiness, value, recognition, achievement, self-expression, and altruism. These are all constantly being exploited by the control system. The primal fears are death, pain, abandonment, failure, judgment, rejection, the unknown, loss of control, betrayal, intimacy, isolation, and change, as well as delayed gratification, temporary comfort for long-term benefits, fear of yourself, your power and your potential, fear of objective truth and reality, to face the truth of your abuse, subjugation, and enslavement, the fear of personal responsibility or cosmic adulthood, that responsibility for what you think, feel, and do, and fear of independence due to cosmic abandonment and codependence. The next method of mind control is indoctrination and propaganda. These two are very similar but distinct by context. One is the ends, the other the means. Propaganda is the method or apparatus used to bombard its targets with false or distorted information, and indoctrination is the process and the resulting state or condition. Propaganda is more direct and focused towards a specific agenda or belief. Indoctrination is more broad and systemized, a cumulative worldview. Propaganda is defined as the systematic dissemination of information, ideas, or opinions, often with a biased or misleading nature, intended to influence the thoughts, beliefs, attitudes, or behaviors of individuals or groups. It is a persuasive communication tool used to shape public opinion, manipulate perceptions, and advance specific agendas. Propaganda can take many forms, such as written or spoken messages, images, visuals, audiovisual media, or social media content. It often employs persuasive techniques that appeal to emotions, biases, and preconceived notions, aiming to sway individuals towards a particular viewpoint or course of action. Those who can make you believe absurdities can make you commit atrocities. Indoctrination refers to the process of imparting beliefs, ideas, or ideologies to individuals, often with a strong emphasis on a conformity and adherence to a particular worldview or set of principles. Indoctrination can occur in various contexts, such as religious organizations, political ideologies, extremist groups, or cult-like environments. Its primary aim is to shape the thoughts, beliefs, attitudes, and behaviors of individuals in alignment with a specific set of principles or agenda. The degree of intensity and the methods used can vary, but indoctrination often seeks to create deep-seated convictions that become ingrained within an individual's worldview and identity. These methods of propaganda and indoctrination are manipulation. These methods seek to manipulate the thoughts and emotions of the audience often through selective presentation of information, distortion of facts, or outright fabrication. They frequently use emotional manipulation to create strong attachments and affiliations to the adopted beliefs, often appealing to fear, loyalty, or a sense of identity. Agenda-driven, purposefully designed and disseminated to serve specific objectives or promote particular interests such as political, ideological, or commercial agendas. Belief imposition involves the imposition of a particular set of beliefs or doctrines, usually by an authority figure or institution, such as religious leaders, political organizations, or educational systems. A one-sided perspective typically presents a one-sided or heavily biased perspective, discouraging or dismissing alternative viewpoints or critical analysis. Repetition and reinforcement relies on repetitive messaging and reinforcement techniques to strengthen and solidify the adopted beliefs and make it more memorable, increasing the likelihood of acceptance and internalization, and difficult to question or challenge. Simplification and stereotyping often simplifies complex issues, presenting them in black and white terms and relying on stereotypes and generalizations to support its claims. A targeted audience, tailored to specific target audiences, taking into account their demographics, beliefs, values, and vulnerabilities to maximize its persuasive impact. And conformity in group dynamics often occurs within group settings or context where conformity and peer pressure play a significant role in reinforcing and maintaining the adopted beliefs. Nonconformity may be discouraged or met with social ostracism or punishment. The primary sources of propaganda and indoctrination. First, you have media, news, entertainment, music, etc. This includes television, social media, internet, podcasts, radio. These outlets perpetuate false or distorted information, toxic worldviews, and axioms conducive to manipulating behavior and gaslighting. In other words, they want you to believe what they're telling you over your own senses. They exploit you by triggering pain points, just like marketing makes people cling to a belief or rush to a false solution, as well as the appeal to authority. And they use repetition and subliminal messaging. Again, remember that all the media that you see is owned by these 6 companies. And they want you to believe that there's a variety of perspectives. And Jim Morrison, singer of The Doors, said, "Whoever controls the media controls the mind." Next, we have education, school, and academia. An array of mind control techniques are used in the school system, which was modeled around the Prussian system, which I highly recommend you look into that. This education model was openly touted as the ultimate mechanism for forming ideal slaves to transform the population into productive workers and obedient soldiers. Individuality and free thought is crushed, and blind obedience to authority is instilled. Children are taught what to think, not how to think. A pro-establishment worldview full of propaganda, fake history, and false virtues is installed in their young and impressionable minds. Radical ideology is especially pushed in the college campuses. George Carlin said, "Governments don't want a population capable of critical thinking. They want obedient workers, people just smart enough to run the machines and just dumb enough to passively accept their situation." I also want to add here that as far as the dumbing down of the population, everyone's aware this is happening, but I don't think it's just because people are stupid. I actually don't believe that. There's a difference between lack of information and lack of critical thinking skills. Yes, people are misinformed, and that's part of it. They're not taught how to think, as I said earlier. But also a part of it is the dumbing down of society is not just a product of poor education, but a product of chronic stress and trauma, which literally shuts down the higher brain function. They're incapable of accessing their higher thinking abilities. Then you have religion and cults. Religion uses truth mixed with deception or blatant lies to trick its victims into accepting a false or skewed worldview about the true nature of our existential reality and spirituality. It espouses false axioms and promotes blind belief and faith so its followers never question its teachings. The New Age belief system falls into this category as a contemporary religion rebranding. And we have science. The institutional scientific community works similarly to religion and acts as a second layer of mental entrapment for those who have become disillusioned to traditional religions or reject the notion of spirituality altogether. It operates on the same faith-based religious ideology, using phrases like experts agree and peer-reviewed to maintain trust and credibility. It still serves as a faith-based proxy authority of truth to replace your own direct experience in gnosis. Any deviation or challenging of the approved narratives are met with strong ridicule, criticism, and contempt. And we have politics and law. Politics push false or slanted issues and ideas which distract, trigger, and misinform the public. It pits half-truths against each other to divide and gaslight its followers. Politics is a false paradigm which operates on manufacturing outrage and the erroneous presumption to legislate morality, which is to create rights out of thin air by authoring magical documents called bills. Laws themselves are a proxy for true morality and natural law based on moral relativism and the whims of corrupt politicians. Next up, we have the Hegelian dialectic, also known as problem-reaction-solution. False dichotomy. You present a problem, whether authentic or artificial, then present two false solutions, both of which serve the goals of the controller and giving the illusion of choice, that is to say, free will hacking, as well as false flags. The false flag is where they fabricate a traumatic or chaotic event, present an artificial narrative, or blame a patsy or scapegoat, then offer a solution which aligns with the secret agenda. So here's the classic example: problem, reaction, solution. They create the problem, they blame the scapegoat, and then the solution is what they wanted all along: to invade the other country, pillage their resources, gain more control. It's all anything they ever do is gain more control. So first, the system designates or fabricates a real or artificial threat to channel the aggressive energy from trauma, and then gives mechanisms by which to exact violence and domination on to others in the name of this external threat. Nazi Germany is a perfect example. People wonder how these atrocities ever happened. The answer is simple. The government channeled ancestral and fresh trauma into a reverence for a collective ideal, nationalism, and an organization, the Nazi Party, and that's the mechanism, and a hatred from an external group, the Jews, and then channeled that aggression from one into the other. 9/11, obviously, fabricated a traumatic event, blamed an external group. The Taliban was trained and radicalized by the CIA, by the way, and used to justify a literal war of terror and paved the way for draconian security measures. That's, they had their agenda domestically as well as just the invasion, that, all the creation of the TSA and all that nonsense. And of course, you've got the Rona, deadly virus. There's your problem. Reaction, pandemic, state of emergency, solution, lockdowns, shots. Not to mention the copious amounts of trauma that came about from that whole charade. People are still reeling from the shock waves from that. Next, we have controlled opposition. Controlled opposition refers to a strategy or tactic employed by individuals, organizations, or governments to manage or manipulate dissent or opposition movements. It involves the creation or support of seemingly oppositional groups or individuals who, in reality, serve the interest of the controlling entity. The purpose of controlled opposition is to give the appearance of genuine opposition and propose false solutions while effectively maintaining control and suppressing or redirecting true dissent and preventing any meaningful change. And here are a few examples of potential controlled opposition. I'm not going to say for sure, you can't know without definitive proof that any one of these are for sure, but at least most of these are examples of controlled opposition, especially this guy. So, controlled opposition involves co-opting or infiltrating genuine opposition movements, organizations, or individuals to influence their activities, goals, or narratives. It may engage in symbolic acts of resistance or dissent to create the illusion of opposition while avoiding meaningful or substantial challenges to the status quo, like Elon buying Twitter, for example. It's like, oh, but look, he's the good guy. He's standing up for free speech, I don't know for sure. I'm just saying that's what it looks like to me. Alex Jones going out there with his bullhorn and, spearheading the protests and things like that. Or Trump he's not one of them, right? He's an outsider. That's why they don't like him. Is he though? Is he? All right. They may also engage in coordinated actions or stage events to give the appearance of grassroots activism or resistance while remaining under the control or influence of the controlling entity. Creating a false boogeyman can also be considered a tactic within the broader strategy of controlled opposition and operates hand in hand with the Hegelian dialectic. It involves intentionally fabricating or exaggerating threats or enemies to divert attention, manipulate public opinion, or maintain control over a narrative or agenda. By creating a false enemy, those in power can direct public attention and fear towards a manufactured threat, often misrepresenting or exaggerating its significance, while diverting attention and retaliation far away from the true enemies of humanity. This tactic can serve several purposes, including emotional manipulation, distraction, consolidating support, strengthening codependency, and justifying actions. An example that hasn't yet come to pass is potentially Project Bluebeam, using an alien invasion that would unite, like I said, consolidating support, strengthening codependency, this false alien invasion to create a world government. And Vladimir Lenin himself said the best way to control the opposition is to lead it ourselves. So basically, you've got fake good guys and fake bad guys. Another common mind control technique is the exploitation of the law of polarity. So again, false dialectics, polarizing people to one side of an issue or another, when the true solution is usually a balance or synthesis of the two, or neither. An appeal to imbalance of the left and right hemispheres, master and slave think. So they know people are going to fall into one of these two categories, so they push them into that and then exploit it. So different constructs, ideologies, etc. appeal to different polarities of brain imbalance. They've got a program for everyone, every kind of demographic. Those with the right susceptibility will naturally gravitate towards the program, custom designed for their exact psychological profile. Mind control is all about predictability of human behavior. If you're running on programs, you're predictable. Then all they have to do is give you the right stimulus, and they can elicit exactly the behavioral response they desire or lure you into certain behaviors or identity constructs based on your psychological predisposition. And why do you think they put so much money and effort into collecting your data. That's how they control you. Next, we have language. When you control language, you control what and how people think. They do this through obfuscation of words, doublespeak, green language, or known as the language of the birds. So, they do this by using distortion and misrepresentation, so by selectively emphasizing certain aspects while downplaying or omitting others to manipulate perception or understanding. Ambiguity and vagueness, the deliberate use of imprecise or unclear language to avoid making specific commitments or to leave room for multiple interpretations. They do this with law all the time so that it can mean whatever they want it to mean. Reversal of meaning, flipping the meaning of words or concepts to convey the opposite message. For example, using freedom to justify oppressive measures. Jargon and technical language, the use of specialized vocabulary or technical terms to confuse or exclude the average listener and give an impression of expertise or authority. And euphemisms, the use of mild or indirect language to downplay or soften the impact of negative or controversial ideas. For example, using collateral damage instead of civilian casualties. Or taxation instead of theft. Government instead of slavery. Things like that. And next we have symbolism. Symbolism. Symbols can deeply affect and program the subconscious mind. Works similar to language, but at an even deeper primordial psychological level. So it works through associations and meanings. Symbols can carry cultural, personal, or archetypal meanings that are ingrained in the collective consciousness. When encountering a symbol, the subconscious mind may automatically associate it with specific ideas, emotions, or experiences, triggering corresponding reactions or responses. And those associations can be fabricated as well. Emotional triggers. Symbols can evoke strong emotional responses. They tap into deep-seated emotions, desires, fears, and aspirations, bypassing the conscious mind and directly influencing the subconscious. These emotional triggers can shape perceptions, attitudes, and behaviors without explicit awareness. Archetypal resonance. Symbols can tap into universal archetypes, which are deeply rooted patterns or images shared across cultures and history. Archetypal symbols such as the sun, moon, or serpent hold profound meaning and can evoke a sense of familiarity or resonance within the subconscious, influencing perceptions and experiences. Priming and conditioning. Symbols can act as priming stimuli, activating certain mental frameworks or cognitive biases without conscious awareness. Through repeated exposure, symbols can condition the subconscious mind to associate specific ideas, products, or behaviors with desired outcomes or responses. Subliminal messaging. Symbols can be used in subliminal messaging where they are presented non-verbally and below the threshold of conscious perception, but still register in the subconscious mind. This technique aims to influence behavior or attitudes by bypassing conscious resistance or scrutiny. So you don't even know it's happening. It goes right in there. Next, we have programming. Classical conditioning, repetition, operant conditioning, that good cop, bad cop, reward and punishment, heaven and hell, alternating brutality with kindness, and demonizing morality while praising evil. Modeling. Modeling involves learning by observing and imitating others. People are more likely to adopt behaviors they see being rewarded or praised, particularly when the model is someone they identify with or perceive as having authority or expertise. Neurolinguistic programming is a psychological approach that explores how language and communication techniques can be used to reframe perspectives, influence beliefs, and facilitate personal change. And hypnosis is a state of focused attention and increased suggestibility that can be induced by various techniques. It involves guiding a person into a trance-like state in which they are more receptive to suggestions and instructions. It is used to bypass the critical conscious mind and access the subconscious, where suggestions for new ideas and behavioral modification can be introduced. Now combine this with symbolism, television, right? Things like this. It becomes far more powerful in combination. And that's what all of this system does. Authoritarianism. This is a big one. The concept of external authority is the false belief that another individual, entity, or group have a legitimate higher authority over you than yourself, and is exercised via involuntary institutional hierarchy. This belief pontificates that certain individuals belong to this ruling class, have special rights which you do not possess, and including creating laws and decrees which you are obligated to obey, and is the core foundation of the slave system. It is easily one of the most dangerous, erroneous, and toxic beliefs one could hold. This one belief is the root cause of virtually every case of genocide and democide ever committed throughout history. And I highly recommend anyone to check out a book called The Most Dangerous Superstition by Larkin Rose. The Milgram and Stanford experiments we looked at earlier highlighted the lengths humans will go to comply with a perceived authority figure. The appeal to authority is a psychological manipulation tactic used to further exploit this inclination. Government, politics, science and academia, law enforcement, religious figures, legal and judicial system, education are all examples of so-called authority figures, as well as anyone touting the title of expert, right? Trust the experts, trust the science. Slavery actually begins the moment you accept this belief and externalize your own authority and personal sovereignty over yourself. Once this happens, you will follow dictates outside yourself and your own personal conscience under the false belief that you have some moral obligation to submit and comply with this authority. The installation of this belief in external authority often begins in childhood with an authoritarian parenting style, being taught you should obey whatever your parents say simply because they say so, or they will harshly punish you, often using violence called spanking. This belief is further instilled and solidified through the schooling process, with the rigid and harsh authority of the school, the teachers and the principal, etc. And finally, this role is taken over by the state, the ultimate parental proxy, which governs you the remainder of your adult life. Youth is much more susceptible and therefore heavily targeted. In general, the imprints of trauma and indoctrination on a young and developing mind are much more impactful and resilient, and therefore useful for their purposes of creating future slaves. All right, time to really trigger some people now. There are few who are under deeper mind control than the men and women who willingly take the job of an order follower as the ultimate figure of so-called authority. Typically those who fall in the left brain dominator mindset. These individuals have voluntarily chosen to take up a role of enforcing the arbitrary mandates called laws of the ruling class and enforce them, all of them, upon their fellow man. This role inherently demands that they reject the use of conscious discernment for their own behavior and blindly follow the orders of their superiors, even when directed to take evil and immoral actions. It is quite common to hear complaints about politicians legislating outrageous tyrannical laws and instigating perpetual wars But few seem to place the brunt of the blame upon the individuals tasked to actually carry out and violently impose these laws, inflicting innumerable systemic traumas upon the public, thus perpetuating the trauma-based mind control program. These are the people who are directly imposing the slave system upon humanity. And of course, you have dogmatic belief systems used to control people. Some big examples would be statism, the government, political factions, so not just the belief in government itself, but then the partisan box within a box of their own polarized ideology, religious fundamentalism, scientism, not real true science, which everyone is practicing at all times, provided they're using their brain at all. Scientism is the dogmatic belief in what they're telling you science has proven. And cultural or social ideologies, there are many. We'll get more into culture later. Diet and toxins, it's another big one. One that people don't typically think of as mind control. Diet and toxicity plays an extremely important role in our cognitive function, emotional stability and health, physical and spiritual health as well. Food is a paramount battleground for the war on your mind. Things like brain fog, addiction, inflammation, obesity, hormonal disruption, genetic mutation, toxicity, processed foods, preservatives, heavy metals, pesticides, sugar. These are all drugs and chemical and biological warfare, essentially. And a cousin to that is drugs. The use of drugs has commonly been associated with mind control, such as LSD, MDMA, scopolamine, chloroform, and barbiturates. Common antidepressants, antipsychotics, mood stabilizers, anxiolytics, and stimulants are used in treating various forms of mental illness. There is an epidemic of addiction to these pills. Not only is it a massive industry, but there is plenty of evidence to suggest that not only are these substances ineffective at doing so, but actually make these conditions worse and put users into a zombie-like state similar to hypnosis, suppressing their higher cognitive functionality and making them highly susceptible to more subversive manipulation and programming. There are also many ways in which the public could be potentially surreptitiously administered various mind-altering drugs which increase their programmability, such as chemicals and compounds in food, water supply, pharmaceuticals, vaccinations, cosmetics, just to name a few. Who knows what they're putting in stuff, right? There's so much trust involved in the system of our food, our medicine, chemicals, cosmetics, right? Shampoo. Like, you don't know what's in there. You're not a scientist. Are you testing your shampoo every time you bring it home? Probably not. Just saying. All right, television. Well, everybody knows this one. When you think of mind control, that's like the first thing you think of. And that's valid. Television has been a dominant medium for entertainment, news, and communication since the mid-1920s. In the early days of television, the image on the screen was created by rapidly flashing a series of still images. This created a flicker effect that some researchers believe could be used to induce a hypnotic state in viewers. Viewers experienced a shift in brainwave activity from beta waves associated with alertness and focus to alpha waves associated with relaxation and suggestibility, very similar to hypnosis. This shift in brainwave activity made viewers more susceptible to suggestion and persuasion. Now, although the flicker rate of modern televisions is much higher than that of older cathode ray tube style, there is still some concern about the effects of this refresh rate on our brain and visual system. Some studies suggest that exposure to a high refresh rate can cause eye strain, headaches, and fatigue. Then we have frequencies. You've got audio, radio, EMF, electromagnetic, cell phone, Wi-Fi, electrical, radiation, and we're being bombarded by these frequencies non-stop, especially in cities. Though there's a suspicious lack of scientific evidence, or even study for that matter, to support this idea, it is at least worth considering the effects that these frequencies might play on a human mind. These frequencies could potentially tamper with brainwave activity as well as alter the mood and cognitive functions of a target. Just think about heavy metals that collect in your brain from all the crap that's in food, as well as other sources as well. How are those heavy metals in your brain interacting with these frequencies? Wage and tax slavery. The system is designed to keep you in the hamster wheel, constantly concerned with producing income and maintaining survival, so you never have time to stop and think about the condition of slavery you're in or the abuse being done to you. And two nice quotes here about taxes. The art of taxation consists in so plucking the goose as to obtain the largest amount of feathers with the least possible amount of hissing. And a fine is a tax for doing wrong. A tax is a fine for doing well. So you're damned if you do and damned if you don't. Now, this just might be the most powerful and insidious product of mind control. Trivium hacking is not only about feeding people false information, but keeping them cut off from true knowledge. And there is no body of knowledge more vitally important and empowering than occult knowledge. Occult simply means hidden. Occult or esoteric knowledge is nothing more or less than the hidden knowledge about ourselves, our psychology, true spirituality, and the hidden laws of the universe. Most of all, the ones pertaining to the moral rights and consequences which govern human behavior and our freedom. This knowledge is the ultimate source of power and sovereignty of the human being, and therefore is the ultimate threat to the slave system. Because of this fact, there are potent and entrenched mind control programs in place to dissuade anyone from ever looking into it, either dismissing it as superstitious nonsense via nihilism, materialistic mindset, inherently evil and corrupt via the religious mindset, or not a supreme authority over man via satanic, solipsistic, and relativistic mindset. And one or more of these three false beliefs about occultism apply to the vast majority of human beings on the planet, and keeping them completely ignorant of themselves and how reality actually works. It is because of humanity's ignorance to this knowledge which keeps us collectively enslaved. Ivan Pavlov could be seen as the godfather of modern mind control techniques. Born in Russia in 1849, his work first caught the attention of Vladimir Lenin, who funded and equipped Pavlov with whatever he needed to continue his research. His influence inspired a whole new era of curiosity and paranoia as it was applied and advanced throughout various world events such as the show trials of Soviet Russia, the Korean War, the Cold War, and MK Ultra. Pavlov's work demonstrated that the mind is extremely malleable using simple techniques and patterns. Some of these techniques are classical conditioning. Pavlov is most famous for his discovery of classical conditioning, which is a type of learning where a previously neutral stimulus comes to evoke a response because it has been associated with a stimulus that already produces a response. For example, when Pavlov rang a bell before feeding his dogs, they eventually began to salivate at the sound of the bell, even when no food was presented. And there you see the Taco Bell logo, and every time you see that commercial, God forbid you actually watch TV anymore, but At the end of that, every commercial for Taco Bell, there's that dong, and after just showing you all this luscious food, they're using that, and most people don't even question it. They don't even realize what that is. Extinction. Pavlov discovered that a conditioned response could be modified or extinguished if the conditioned stimulus was repeatedly presented without the unconditioned stimulus, showing that learned behaviors were not necessarily permanent. This is why indoctrination must be cumulative. It's a constant barrage, keeping it all fresh. Spontaneous recovery. Pavlov also observed that after a period of extinction, a previously conditioned response could sometimes re-emerge spontaneously if the conditioned stimulus was presented again. This is known as spontaneous recovery. So that program is still implanted in your mind, didn't go away, it just became dormant because it stopped having the same stimulus, but then they can bring it back by bringing that stimulus back. Generalization. Pavlov demonstrated that a conditioned response could be elicited not only by the original conditioned stimulus, but also by stimuli that were similar to the original. This process is known as generalization, which you could look at things like racism, sexism, or even mass shootings. Your mind will lump everything into categories, and they'll associate a certain stimulus, right? A man mansplaining, or a black guy in a hoodie, or a mass shooting, with everything that's attached to in your mind, especially because it's a trauma response. And higher order conditioning. Pavlov demonstrated that a conditioned stimulus could be used to condition a new stimulus. This is known as higher order conditioning and has important implications for how we learn about the world. Next, we have Edward Bernays. Born in 1891 in Vienna, Austria, he is often referred to as the father of public relations. He was the nephew of Sigmund Freud, which influenced his understanding of human psychology and behavior. Drawing inspiration from Freud's theories and merging them with concepts from social psychology, he applied them to public relations, propaganda, and advertising. One of Bernays' most notable contributions was his application of psychological techniques to shape public opinion and behavior. He emphasized the importance of appealing to emotions, desires, fears, and irrational impulses rather than relying solely on rational arguments. Bernays believed that by understanding the unconscious motivations of individuals, it was possible to influence their decision-making processes and control their behavior. He utilized the media to create and shape public narratives, orchestrated large-scale events to generate publicity, and used celebrities and influential figures as spokespersons to endorse products or ideas. He also pioneered the concept of engineering consent, which we talked about earlier, which involved using propaganda techniques to shape public opinion in favor of certain policies or products. One of Bernays' most influential campaigns was the promotion of smoking amongst women. Through clever marketing strategies and associating smoking with women's liberation and empowerment, he successfully changed the social norms and perceptions surrounding smoking, leading to an increase in tobacco consumption among women. Real nice guy, huh? Exploiting women's desire to be empowered in order to poison them and sell a bunch of cigarettes. And the man himself said, "Those who manipulate the organized habits and opinions of the masses constitute an invisible government, which is the true ruling power of the country." Up next, we have B.F. Skinner. Skinner was an influential psychologist and behaviorist known for his work on operant conditioning and behavior modification. Born in 1904 in the U.S., Skinner's experiments and theories have had a significant impact on the field of psychology. Skinner's most prominent findings revolved around operant conditioning, which is a type of learning where behavior is influenced by its consequences. Really, yeah, it's almost like human beings are designed to learn via natural law, action, consequence. He proposed that behavior is shaped through reinforcement or punishment, and that the consequences of an action determine the likelihood of its recurrence. Skinner introduced the concept of the Skinner box, as shown here, an apparatus that allowed for precise control and measurement of behavior in laboratory settings. One of Skinner's notable contributions was his work on schedules of reinforcement. He discovered that the timing and pattern of reinforcement could affect the rate and persistence of behavior. Skinner also developed the technique of shaping, which involves reinforcing successive approximations of a desired behavior. By reinforcing behaviors that are increasingly similar to the target behavior, Skinner showed that complex behaviors could be shaped over time. The Tavistock Institute of Human Relations is an influential think tank established in 1919 and based in London, England. The institute was funded by international banking interests, primarily the Rothschild family, and played a significant role in shaping social, cultural, political, and economic developments around the world. The institute's primary goal was to manipulate public opinion and control the minds of society. Their accomplishments included orchestrating social and cultural changes, influencing political decisions, and promoting a globalist agenda. Tavistock employed various methodologies to achieve its objectives, including psychological warfare. They utilized manipulation and propaganda techniques to influence public opinion and control individuals' minds. They utilized techniques such as propaganda campaigns, misinformation, and psychological manipulation to shape people's beliefs and behaviors. Mind control, studying and developed mind control techniques and conducted research on methods to manipulate and control individuals' thoughts, emotions, and behaviors, potentially using techniques like hypnosis, subliminal messaging, and behavior modification. Social engineering, influencing and shaping social structures, norms, and values to achieve desired societal outcomes, aiming to disrupt traditional family structures, promote cultural and moral decline, and create social divisions to further its globalist agenda, as well as an influence on education. Reformation of the education system, promoting curricula and teaching methods that fostered conformity, social conditioning, and indoctrination in order to control the educational system to shape the beliefs and values of future generations. All right, let's take a look at the narcissist toolkit. The term narcissist gets thrown around a lot these days, and there are many definitions and ideas around it. So let's clarify what is meant and when it's used in the context of this presentation. A narcissist is a person who is polarized into the left brain dominant mindset, or the master dominator mindset. They are predators who are obsessed with control and identify with and take on the role of the abuser. Their behavior and tactics are virtually the same, whether they are an individual with a chokehold of control on a single person, such as their spouse, or a politician or dictator manipulating millions of people. They were once victimized themselves, but then became identified with their abuser. Narcissists often use a variety of tactics to manipulate and control their victims. It is extremely important for everyone to become very familiar with these, so it becomes easier to recognize them when they're directed at you, no matter by whom. Here are the most common methods narcissists use to maintain their control. So the most popular one is gaslighting. Gaslighting is a tactic in which the narcissist makes their victim grow to doubt their own reality, memory, rationality, and perceptions, which reinforces codependence because the victim will then look to their abuser for truth and stability. Gaslighting can take several forms, including pathological lying. The narcissist may lie constantly, even about things that are easily verifiable, in order to manipulate and control the victim. It's a constant barrage of misinformation that just wears down your mental fortitude. Blame shifting, a form of gaslighting. The narcissist may shift blame onto their victim for problems or conflicts in the relationship, even when the victim is not at fault. This can make the victim feel responsible and guilty and prevent them from asserting their needs and boundaries. Projection. Projection is a tactic in which the narcissist attributes their own negative qualities, thoughts, or behaviors to their victim. This can make the victim feel confused, guilty, and responsible for the narcissist's problems, and can also make it difficult for them to assert their own needs and boundaries. Invalidating. The narcissist may invalidate the victim's own thoughts, feelings, and experiences, making them feel unimportant, insignificant, unreasonable, or crazy. And denial. The narcissist may deny that certain events occurred, creating confusion and making the victim doubt their own memory and sanity. Another mental tactic used is demanding the victim's attention, time, or energy, encouraging them or enforcing them into disregarding their own needs and boundaries. With the emotional tactics, you have manipulation. The narcissist may emotionally manipulate the victim by using guilt, shame, or flattery to get them to do what they want. Love bombing is a tactic in which the narcissist showers the victim with affections, gifts, and attention in order to quickly build a strong emotional connection and dependency. This can make it difficult for the victim to recognize the narcissist's abusive behavior and can create a sense of obligation and loyalty. The narcissist may use their charisma and charm to win over the victim, making it difficult for them to see their abusive behavior. And the silent treatment, also known as freezing out. They may use the silent treatment to punish their victim for not meeting their demands or expectations. They may withhold communication, affection, or attention until the victim complies with their wishes. The physical tactics may be threats and intimidation, or physical violence to control their victim and keep them in line. This can create a sense of fear and dependence on them. Exploitation for their own personal gain, using them for money, status, or other resources. They may control the victim's finances either by restricting their access to money or forcing them to provide financial support. This can create a sense of dependency and make it difficult for the victim to leave the relationship. And socially, they use isolation, in which the narcissist limits their victim's contact with friends, family, or other sources of support. This can create a sense of dependence on the narcissist and make it difficult for the victim to want to leave the relationship. Triangulation is a tactic in which the narcissist involves a third party, such as a friend, family member, or lover, in their relationship with the victim. This is often used to attempt to corroborate or validate the abuser's gaslighting or incite insecurity around the victim's external perception from others. This can be used to create tension and jealousy and make the victim feel like they are competing for the narcissist's attention and affection. And smear campaigns. The narcissist may spread lies or rumors about their victim to others in order to undermine their credibility and isolate them from sources of support. This can make it difficult for the victim to leave the relationship or seek help. Next, let's look at the universal cult techniques. Specific methods used can vary depending on the specific group or context, but there are some common hallmarks that are often seen in cults. Charismatic leader. A cult nearly always has a charismatic leader who is seen as perfect, all-knowing, or having a special relationship with a higher power. This figure is idolized and idealized by members who see them as infallible and can easily identify with. Fear and intimidation. Cults use fear tactics such as threats or punishment or ostracism to control members and prevent them from leaving the group, and creating a sense of anxiety or paranoia that reinforces the need for the cult's protection. Unquestioning obedience. Cult members are often expected to obey the leader or group without question, and dissent or criticism is often met with punishment or ostracism. Cults may use a system of rewards and punishments to control the behaviors of their followers, reinforcing desired behaviors and punishing those that challenge the cult's authority. Cults often use manipulative techniques to indoctrinate and control their members, such as using thought reform methods to change their beliefs and behaviors, such as through the use of repetitive slogans, chants, or mantras. Information control. Cults often restrict access to information from the outside world, such as limiting access to news, books, and other sources of information that may challenge the cult's beliefs or authority. Manipulation of language. Cults often use language in a way that redefines or distorts its meaning, or creating a vocabulary or jargon that reinforces the cult's ideology and reinforces the separation between insiders and outsiders. Isolation and separation. Cults often require a high degree of commitment from members, including isolating them from mainstream society or cutting them off from family and friends who are not members of the group, creating a sense of dependency on the cult and its members. This can make it difficult for individuals to leave the cult or question its teachings. Controlled and minimized stimuli causes negative emotions, reduced cognitive brain performance, and higher suggestibility. The mind craves and thrives on stimulus, an affirmation of the spiritual nature of our existence, that we are here to create and seek out unique experiences and to learn and grow our consciousness. Dehumanization. Cults may use dehumanizing language to describe people who are not part of the group in order to make members feel superior and to justify their separation from mainstream society. This creates an us and them mentality between the cult and non-members. Love bombing. Again, cults may use love bombing to create a sense of belonging and acceptance among new recruits, showering them with attention, affection, and praise to create a sense of dependency on the group and its members and incentivize more involvement and participation. Guilt and shame. Cults may use guilt and shame to control members and to encourage them to conform to the group's standards and beliefs. And financial exploitation. Many cults require members to donate large sums of money to the group or the leader. They may also encourage members to buy products or services from the group. So, again, you may have noticed a bit of redundancy there, and that is on purpose. These techniques, these principles are quite universal, and you just see them time and time again throughout various cults, whether small or large, even down to the individual level. The psychological aspects are the same. So now we come to the ultimate concept by which this presentation is titled, Trivium Hacking. So hacking is the act of covertly accessing a computer program or network without authorization or in a way that was not intended by the system's owner in order to gain control over that system or to alter or manipulate them for their own purposes. The trivium, and when I say this from here out, I'm referring to all three, the trivium, the triad, and the trinity. They are all one system, right? I'm just calling the whole system the trivium to refer to that. The trivium is the threefold path to bringing about new outcomes into the unified reality field. Every individual individual is using this process at all times, whether or not they are aware of it. To hack this process is to hijack their creative ability and therefore control that person and the power of their manifestation. This is trivium hacking. So how does it work? The function of trivium hacking is to 1, attack you at the mental, emotional, and behavioral level, and 2, erode and install a toxic proxy for your true knowledge, care, and courage, and your will. So, informational mind control is an attack on the neocortex, both hemispheres, and this is attacking your thoughts. Emotional mind control is an attack on the mammalian and the right brain through your emotions. And behavioral mind control is attack on the R complex, left brain, and actions. And remember that dissociation, as we discussed earlier, is a psychological experience where an individual's thoughts, feelings, and behaviors have become disconnected from each other. Their integrity has been shattered, right? This is the purpose. If they can control and manipulate the available information, your understanding will be flawed, and subsequently, so will your choices. They can control the beliefs you hold about yourself and the world. They can also select and curate the information you are exposed to, which will cause you to predictably form a certain opinion or emotional reaction, and then take specific actions which happen to align with the goals of the perpetrators. And the more trauma and fear-inducing the information, the better. So again, big scary virus killing millions. State of emergency, pandemic, lockdowns, and vax. 9/11 attacks, big traumatic event there. War of terror, Muslims bad, and you're cheering for TSA and the invasion of Iraq. So an entry point can be found at all levels of the trivium: mental, emotional, behavioral, and reality itself. So at the mental level, they control you by controlling your perception, the available information and knowledge, and discouraging self-awareness and encouraging complacency. The mediums by which they do this are propaganda, indoctrination, academia, misinformation, toxic philosophy that they propagate, and of course, gaslighting. And the resulting mental states are ignorance, illusion, denial, solipsism, relativism, and egotism. So again, always dialectics. If they can't do one, they'll push you into the other. That's the controlled opposition aspect as well. It's all one big mechanism. So if they can't get you into ignorance, they'll get you into false or negative knowledge that you think is correct, that you're informed on, and actually you're completely incorrect. So if they can't get you in both states, they'll get you into one or the other. Another would be either proud ignorance or dogmatism. So either you're proud of not knowing anything, I don't care, couldn't care less, right? People tell you this all the time. Or dogmatism. They think they know and nothing you say can ever convince them otherwise. They are dug in on that. This mental level trivium hacking includes information which you believe or ignore about yourself and the world to protect your ego and your illusions. There's the egotism and the identity aspect of mind control. So, to look at the internal and external aspect, you have the false identity, which is internal and objective, meaning you are objectively falsely identified with things internally. Ego distortion is the subjective. In other words, it's your perception of your true self is distorted internally. Then the false worldview is the external objective state. You are objectively wrong about the world and the way it operates, and you have a distorted perception of it. That is the subjective external aspect. At the emotional level of trivium hacking, they use your cognitive dissonance, emotional immaturity, psychological wounds, and pain points to manipulate you, using the mediums of propaganda, conditioning, controversy or divisive issues, demographics, polarization dialectics, abuse, and gaslighting. These are things that stir you up emotionally, and then they can not only harvest that energy, they can use it to control how you react to things. The resulting emotional states would be apathy, lack of care, fanaticism or radicalism, reactivity, instability, and chronic negative emotions, the depression, anxiety that pretty much everyone struggles with nowadays. So basically, they want you either disassociated and detached from reality and your part in it, right? Don't care, whatever. How many people are stuck in that mindset? Or an irrational zealot, right? Just emotionally fervent towards your cause, your belief, your ideology, whatever. So the dialectics there would be apathy or fanaticism. That's the emotional states of I don't care or I care so much, it's insane. Or dissociation or hypersensitivity. In other words, dissociated and numb like a machine, or hypersensitive, as in everything triggers you. You're just a snowflake that just goes around and freaks out on people. And again, via the trivium, these emotional reactions are based on beliefs about yourself and the world, trauma. So even the trivium hacking is also compounding. It builds upon the prior levels. And the more unhealed trauma, the more miscalibrated and volatile the emotions will be. This is what I call drama-based mind control. At the behavioral level, they destroy or hijack your willpower, courage, and self-efficacy to break you mentally and control your actions. They do this by the mediums of conditioning, programming, social engineering, coercion and laws, and always gaslighting. And the resulting behavioral states are laziness, cowardice, and powerlessness. So they'll make you either lazy to not take action. If they can't do that, they'll make you obsessive. They'll push you into cowardice or martyrdom, like that's the hill that you will die on, right? You'll die on that hill as a martyr to the death. And either a state of powerlessness, thinking, oh, I can't create change through my actions. Oh, I can't make any kind of impact. I'm just a nobody. Or a God complex would be the other end of that spectrum, where they have this overly inflated view of themselves. So your action-based processes at this level are hacked to either make you an insignificant, harmless slave who doesn't care enough to take action, or too cowardly and afraid to take action, and essentially believing you have no ability to make any change, so why bother? Or usurp and exploit those aspects towards the controlling class, own goals. So if you're not a coward, we'll put you in the police and military so that you can use your bravery for our means, right? Your obsession will put towards the rat race, hustle and grind, right? The slave system, the hamster wheel. And your powerlessness, well, maybe I'll just go run for office, then I can really make a change. You know, they hijack those aspects. If they can't destroy it, they'll hijack it. And finally, at the reality level, they manipulate, obfuscate, and mask true reality using illusion and coercion. The mediums they use are such as staged events, public theatrics or drama, controlled opposition, law and artificial consequentialism, culture, and disconnection from nature. Reality itself is highly manipulated and controlled. The spectrum of choices is limited, and the matrix disconnects the population from true freedom and nature. This is part of the domestication agenda, right? People are so cut off and afraid of nature because they're dependent on the system. They lose sight of true nature and how reality operates. Why would I want to go outside my cage when I've got everything I need right here, right? Protection, food, shelter, entertainment. So that is trivium hacking. That's how it works. It builds upon each level, just like the trivium. And they either stifle or hijack that layer, that aspect to use towards their own agendas. So let's look at this from the Trivium perspective, starting with the Trinity. You have your thoughts are now corrupted. They're compromised. You're indoctrinated. Your head is full of propaganda. Therefore, your emotions are miscalibrated based on these incorrect thoughts, this incorrect thinking. And therefore, your actions are out of alignment with truth, out of alignment with moral law. Therefore, your integrity is compromised as well. It all starts from that mental level, and each subsequent layer is then compromised all the way up to your integrity. So this means not only are your thoughts, emotions, and actions out of alignment for a plethora of reasons. Maybe you know the right thing to do, but you're too much of a coward to do it. Maybe you feel one way, but your beliefs, your dogmatic way of seeing things is in conflict, and therefore your emotions and then your actions are confused. You don't know what to do, or you do something irrational. There's all different ways this can go awry when your thoughts, emotions, and actions are all out of alignment. Therefore, you are out of integrity. And this actually will perpetuate the cycle of abuse with yourself via this loop right here, because your integrity is out of alignment, which means you lose respect for yourself. And that then feeds into how you think about yourself, how you feel about yourself, and how you act towards yourself and externally as well. So you see, this system can either work for you or it can work against you. It's all about your state of mind, your alignment, your integrity. This is, again, the internal correspondence and the subjective internal aspect of the Trivium. So then we have the holistic correspondence, which means it's dealing with both the internal and external effects, because it's your internal state then being manifested in reality. So your knowledge is corrupted, you're under mind control, you're full of indoctrination and propaganda, you have false beliefs about the world and about yourself, false perception of self and reality. Therefore, your understanding of yourself and reality are compromised. And therefore, your actions are compromised as well. Your wisdom, you have no wisdom, because this application of knowledge is only as good as your understanding and the knowledge itself. Therefore, the outcome will be garbage. Garbage in, garbage out. And when you're out of integrity, when you're out of alignment, especially with moral truth, the outcome will invariably be slavery, both enslaving yourself and participating in the aggregate condition of slavery, to also potentially even include enslaving others. So you have a police officer who has negative knowledge via statism, the belief in authority. So his understanding of moral truth and moral action are out of alignment. Therefore, his actions will be acting in alignment with his mind control program, his indoctrination, and enslaving other people by extorting them, kidnapping them, throwing them in cages, taxing them, fining them. I mean, the list is pretty extensive, but you get the point. The outcome is slavery, and he's enslaving himself. He's already enslaved to his false beliefs, to his mind control, and then he's enslaving others through his actions, and therefore enslaving himself through his own actions karmically. He's accruing karmic debt through his continued immoral actions. And that's just one example. This applies to anyone universally. And see, the interesting part here is this part, the outcome reforming by confirming or challenging the knowledge. Well, you can have confirmation bias. You can be gaslighted. There's all these other ways that this loop itself gets compromised, so that your own negative knowledge, your own negative karma is actually reinforcing that as well for a while. It's actually unsustainable, but it does work synergistically for a while. And that's where we're at. That's why the slavery system continues. It's like, oh, well, there's so much crime, and little do you know, government is creating more crime. So you think, oh, well, we just need more government and more government to fight all this crime, not seeing that they're actually increasing the problem. So that's how trivium hacking and mind control works at this trivium level. Bad information, bad choices or bad decision-making process, bad behavior, both from a pragmatic, bad, like stupid, gonna get yourself into trouble kind of way, and bad as in bad, evil, immoral, wrong. And therefore, there's your result. The universe is the perfect cosmic mirror for your ignorance. And that's how it works. So as far as mind control programs go, there are what I like to call the big three. The three biggest mind control programs by far are religion, government, and culture. They are the most potent and pervasive forms of indoctrination, authoritarianism, and collectivism, and have been used for thousands of years to manipulate, subjugate, and control the masses. You cannot point to them by looking at any building, book, or any other physical object, yet you can see their effects worldwide for millennia. They have been the cause of every genocide and the worst atrocities in history. They are destructive, invisible mind viruses. So now that we've covered the fundamental tactics and methodology used by cults and abusers, let's take a closer look at these three and see if we recognize any. Religion is regarded by the common people as true, by the wise as false, and by the rulers as useful. Religion, from Latin, religare, to tie, constrain, bind, or hold back. Religion literally means bondage. Its primary purpose and function is to control human behavior by way of spiritual violence, coercion, and duress. And it is a claim over your soul. The gaslighting is humans are born into original sin. They are inherently flawed and incapable of being good on their own. Therefore, they must be saved by an external authority. They are too stupid to lean on their own understanding of the universe and how it works. Therefore, must be taught to blindly believe dogmatically the worldview and laws offered to them from a religious text and clergy, and to become codependent upon divine guidance and salvation to be made whole again. Religion is an attempt to get control over the sensory world in which we are placed by means of the wishful world, which we have developed inside us as a result of biological and psychological necessities. Sigmund Freud. So religion uses virtually every cult manipulation technique in the book, including charismatic leader, fear and intimidation, unquestioning obedience, reward and punishment, indoctrination, informational control, manipulation of language, isolation and separation, dehumanization, love bombing, guilt and shame, financial exploitation. Everything we went over earlier, it's all there. Then you can take a look at these lists as I've put examples of each of those as it relates to religion. The government is a disease masquerading as its own cure. Government, from Latin, gubernare, to control or govern. Mens or mentis, mind, mental. That's where the word mental comes from, governmental. So government literally means mind control. Its primary purpose and function is to control human behavior by way of mental and physical violence, coercion, and duress. It is a claim over your mind and body. The gaslighting is, people are too evil and stupid to rule themselves. Therefore, we need a ruling class to legislate and enforce their own ideas of morality to maintain public order. Otherwise, there would be chaos. Government uses a left versus right dialectic polarization paradigm. Right brain imbalanced individuals tend to trauma bond with the political left. And left brain imbalanced individuals tend to trauma bond with the political right. Both think that they are brainwashed. Ironically, they're both correct. Statist mind control works by either convincing its subjects that they are rightfully slaves so that they paradoxically consent to be governed, or by using coercion and violence to force compliance. That's the theme you'll see throughout this. They'll either suppress or hijack, one or the other. The government's primary goal is to grow its power, influence, and control. The easiest and simple way it does this is by allowing and even perpetuating the trauma and chaos it claims to protect us from. The more disorder, fear, and suffering, the more people will be clamoring to give their rights away and relinquish more control to the government. Some examples would be the CIA pushing drugs in the ghetto. Drug prohibition itself is the only reason cartels are so powerful and dangerous, and the cartels are also in the government's pockets. They're the boogeyman. They use them as controlled opposition. Even though they are actually dangerous and criminal, there's no real difference between the government and the cartel and the mafia. They're all the same. They're just giving you the illusion that they're separate entities. That's mind control. And there's countless examples of them doing this. All government, in its essence, is a conspiracy against the superior man. Its one permanent object is to oppress him and cripple him. So, government uses virtually every cult manipulation technique in the book, including charismatic leader, fear and intimidation, unquestioning obedience, reward and punishment, indoctrination, information control, manipulation of language, isolation and separation, dehumanization, love bombing, guilt and shame, manipulation of time, financial exploitation. So again, I'm not going to read all of these for sake of time, but pause it, take a look and see for yourself. These are plenty of examples of each of these. They're using the full playbook. Government is an unnecessary evil. Human beings, when accustomed to taking responsibility for their own behavior, can cooperate on a basis of mutual trust and helpfulness. Man will never be free until the last king is strangled with the entrails of the last priest. Now that is very harsh, and obviously my intention is not to actually encourage violence, but it makes a point worth considering. Government is a religion, and religion is government. So this slide is here to show you yet another perspective of how they are one and the same. They are both mind control systems. Both claim authority over you. They rely on dogmatic belief, voting, or prayer. You got taxes and tithing. You've got middlemen. clergy, politicians, police. You've got a holy documents, Bible, Constitution, laws could go on there as well. Divine founders, the founding fathers, apostles, holy temples, known as government offices, church, synagogue, mosque. Sacred symbols, the flag, the cross. You've got your laws and commandments, treason and idolatry, basically the same thing. Blasphemy and sedition, same thing. Dialectics, left and right, denominations, right? Pentecostal, Lutheran, Republican, Democrat. Missionaries and campaigns, right? Got to spread that message. Get new recruits, take them in. You've got praise and worship and rally supporters, right? Flag waving idiots, crusades and war, and then conscription and human sacrifice. Just something to consider. Culture is not an expression of individuality. It is an expression of conformity. It is a means of control. Terence McKenna. So culture, from Latin cultura or colere, to cultivate, to prepare land for the raising of crops. Culture literally means to prepare the mind for farming. Its primary purpose and function is to control human behavior by way of mental and social manipulation, coercion, and duress. The gaslighting is being yourself and standing out is dangerous and a threat to society. You are a part of the whole. Your wants and needs are secondary to the greater good, to the common good. Stifle your individuality to fit in and conform to the collective, and all your needs will be taken care of. And what is individuality but your own mind? Your true identity must be excavated before a false identity can be implanted. So your culture is the cult you're in. Culture primarily uses group pressure to control behavior. Humans are hardwired to mimic the behavior of others and have a deep fear of ostracization for survival reasons. Culture is not your friend. Culture is for other people's convenience and the convenience of various institutions, churches, companies, tax collection schemes, and what have you. Old Terence really didn't like culture. He spoke a lot about it. Most people are not even aware that their need to conform. They live under the illusion that they follow their own ideas and inclinations, that they are individualists, that they have arrived at their opinions as the result of their own thinking, and that it just so happens that their ideas are the same as those of the majority. So government, religion, and culture work together to create a gridlock of control over the mind, body, and spirit. Government claims the body, culture claims the mind, and religion claims the spirit, and all three control the mind. Another manifestation of Trivium hacking. Every single aspect of your being is claimed by the system. How does that make you feel? It is an anti-human system. Now that we have a good understanding of the universal mind control techniques and methods, let's put all the pieces together. It is important to keep in mind that though some of these methods may be less potent on their own, consider that the average person is being bombarded with nearly all of these simultaneously, constantly, and on a daily basis for their entire lives. This will surely create a compounding effect that accumulates over time, driving a person into deeper and more entrenched psychosis. So to summarize, dark occultists deploy perpetual and cumulative trauma and manipulation tactics to constantly assault and fracture the individual's self-identity construct and erode their ability to exercise a functional trivium process. These psychological wounds are then used as entry points for trauma bonding with an array of mind control programs, each tailored for any and all types of psychological profiles and psychoses. These individual algorithms degrade a person's self-worth and propagate an addictive cycle of abuse and predictable and malleable behavioral output. They also utilize a constant barrage of propaganda and misinformation, as well as the obscuration of pertinent knowledge to obfuscate the individual's discernment and navigation capacity to operate intelligently in the world. This cohesive process allows a comprehensive control matrix to overlay and usurp the individual's free will behavior and therefore shape what is collectively co-created as the human condition of slavery in service to the ruling class. So this is the story of mind control in the slave system. People are born into an invisible prison controlled by psychopathic ruling class. They are introduced to a hostile and abusive world and raised by parents caught in the same cycle. They are traumatized and indoctrinated at every angle. Throughout childhood and schooling and beyond, their true selves are shamed, violated, and eventually become buried. They are taught endless lies, all corroborated by the imposing system. Their mind, their care, and their creativity becomes hijacked and co-opted. Their souls fractured. They frantically assimilate the plethora of false identity constructs designed to serve the slave system. They are relentlessly bombarded with every mind control tactic in the book as it molds them into the perfect specimen for control. It is an ongoing process that continues throughout their lives. Once they reach adulthood, they go out into the world and try to find their place and purpose, never realizing that nearly every choice is already pre-designed to serve the matrix at their expense. They become police, doctors, laborers, engineers, soldiers, preachers, factory workers, and cubicle occupants, bankers, politicians and teachers, bureaucrats and desk clerks, all generally wanting to do some good, make a difference. Unwitting cogs in the system of institutions that perpetuate tax and wage slavery, violence and subjugation, consumerism, indoctrination, physical, biological, chemical, and spiritual warfare, and endless scams. Their caged inner voice crying out in agony and despair as they distract themselves with mindless entertainment, celebrity obsession, self-destruction and degradation, senseless drama, lamenting skewed and fruitless issues, never facing the true reality of their enthrallment. They entrench themselves in empty identities and causes that soothe their gnawing dissent and makes them easy to manipulate, predict, and control. They give everything, feeding every ounce of their energy, creativity, vitality, and freedom to the machine, and then they die, a spent husk of a human being, but not before spawning offspring to pass on their legacy of servitude. A bleak and harrowing tale of existence, but it doesn't have to be this way. So how do we free ourselves from mind control? What can we do to break it? Is it hopeless? Are we too far gone? While it is true that humanity exists in the current condition of deep mind control and slavery, this state is not permanent but conditional. Just as mind control and slavery have conditions that must be met to be manifested, so does freedom. And it is entirely in the realm of possibility, so long as those requirements are met. Again, nothing overrides the existence of choice, no matter how distorted, suppressed, and obfuscated it may seem. The only reason that such a parasitic and toxic system can exist and thrive as it does is that it is supported collectively by a majority of individuals in a traumatized and disempowered mindset. They are self-loathing and demoralized and fully willing to delegate their own sovereignty and personal responsibility away to a ruling class. It exists because they believe it must, and they insist that it is necessary. The current external condition of humanity as a whole is a correspondence of the internal, mental, emotional, and behavioral state of all individuals in the aggregate. There are two primary components which are essential to breaking all forms of mind control: knowledge of fundamental truths and healing from trauma. That is, to take control of your thoughts and your emotions, and therefore your actions. Knowledge and healing are the internal correspondences of the external cosmic forces of truth and love. Doing this will restore the inverted dynamics of trivium hacking and create a condition of harmony and symbiosis on the planet, but only if we choose it. Doing this will allow us to reclaim our minds from these evil beings. Mind control is inevitable. If you don't control your own mind, someone else will. So truth and healing work synergistically, in tandem. Think of them like 2 feet, both required for taking steps forward. They must happen simultaneously for real change to occur. Truth is required in order to heal, because trauma creates distortions and illusions which prop up the false narrative and keep it going. So truth will shatter those illusions and allow true healing to take place. Healing is required in order to recognize and accept truth, because trauma will distort perceptions, trigger strong negative emotions, and ultimately cause a person to reject truth. Healing will balance the emotions, open the mind and heart to allow truth to be received. So you can only take in and reconcile with truth from your level of healing, and you can only heal based on your level of understanding and acceptance of truth. They fuel and enable one another cooperatively, like the alternating pistons of a motor. Truth brings recalibration and integration, and healing brings awareness and revelation. Without truth, healing cannot occur. Without healing, truth cannot be accepted. Truth is healing, and healing is truth. Truth is required as an essential aspect of reclaiming your mind, body, and soul. But what truth? There are many truths or perspectives, yet only one truth. So what is this truth that will break this spell and free mankind? Truth is simply that which is. Truth itself is not perception, but that which exists independently of it. Truth is what has occurred, what is occurring, and what will occur via the trajectory of variables, events, choices, and dynamics, past, present, and future. It is all facts and deterministic dynamics of potentiality and probability. The universe and its nature. It is reality itself and the laws that govern it. So we must release what is not true and take in what is true. The greatest enemy of knowledge is not ignorance, it is the illusion of knowledge. First, we must be willing to release our attachment to false beliefs and axioms, the lies which have been sold to us. Open ourselves up to the possibility of change and growth, and let go of what is based in illusion and not of truth. Then accept the reality too painful to acknowledge, which our minds have attempted to protect us from. Being honest with ourselves about the condition of our enslavement, of the traumas and horrors we have been victimized with, the truth of our subsequent wounding, and most of all, that those traumas and wounds nor the false constructs we've identified with do not define us. We must also become critical consumers of information, seek diverse perspectives, and engage in independent thinking to avoid being unduly influenced by dogmatic belief, psyops, and manufactured consent. It is not the truth that hurts, but the destruction of your illusions. Another way to encapsulate truth in a more tangible and practical capacity is understanding occult knowledge. This means the knowledge of oneself and the universe, the inner and outer worlds at the fundamental level. This means to know thyself, to deeply understand your own psychology, both as a human being and yourself specifically as an individual. Your strengths and weaknesses, your wounds and traumas, your shadow, your gifts, your power, potential, and your divine purpose. And coming to know this world and the way it operates via the natural laws, a deep integration of this knowledge, getting your mindset right, calibrating your boundaries, balancing your perspectives beyond dialectic traps, and most importantly, to come to know, understand, and understand the truth about your own inherent autonomy, sovereignty, power, and personal responsibility, and of objective moral law governing right from wrong behavior, the non-aggression and the self-defense principles. This is the crux of the dynamic between freedom and slavery via the law of freedom. The law of freedom is, as knowledge increases, morality increases, and therefore freedom increases, creating a state of liberty. As knowledge decreases, morality decreases, and therefore freedom decreases, creating a condition of slavery. This law is self-evident and has never been more apparent than it is now. We are in mass ignorance, moral degradation, and abject slavery, but it's reversible. Thomas Paine said, "The mind once enlightened cannot again become dark." There are two ways to be fooled. One is to believe what isn't true. The other is to refuse to believe what is true. Truth may bring great upheaval, discomfort, and destruction, but this is the fires of awareness laying waste to the illusions held, and once integrated, brings understanding, acceptance, balance, and peace to the mind. To heal is to touch with love that which we previously touched with fear. Healing comes from the Germanic word heil, which means whole, heal, heil. Trauma fractures our psyche and ego. We must heal to become reintegrated with all parts of ourselves, our ego, our thoughts, emotions, and actions. This is the true meaning of integrity, to be integrated. Trauma is an inescapable part of the human experience. We will all experience traumas in life, and my intention with this presentation is not to imply that trauma is inherently bad. However, there is a difference between a natural traumatic event or experience and causing intentional and methodical harm and abuse to a person. Trauma is an essential part of the evolutionary process as an extension of natural law or karmic law. It is fuel for the expansion of consciousness. It acts as the prima materia of which the alchemist transmutes the darkness into higher awareness and power. The goal is not to avoid trauma at all costs, but to empower yourself by learning to harness and leverage it to elevate your spirit to new levels. We are given a choice at all times between two cycles regarding what to do with trauma. One, a cycle of trauma and abuse, victims and abusers. This is the subconscious and unconscious. Or a cycle of trauma and healing to know yourself and others more deeply. Healing from trauma and making the unconscious conscious is the only way to break the chains of mind control. When you heal your perspective, that is the external projection of your internal state, you are no longer susceptible to mind control programs which are rooted in a toxic view of yourself and the world. Once true healing takes place, you will begin to reject the false constructs and toxic behaviors and worldviews thrust upon us from every angle, and can begin to genuinely connect with yourself, others, and the universe. Healing doesn't mean the damage never existed. It means the damage no longer controls our lives. Healing, too, can be extremely uncomfortable and painful at first, but this is necessary, like extracting a searing hot bullet from your flesh or pouring peroxide on a festering wound. This pain is the infection of trauma being purged, cleansed, and purified, and only then can the true healing begin. I could do an entire presentation just on healing. That's beyond the scope of this presentation, but I encourage you to really look into it. The art of healing comes from nature, not from the physician. Therefore, the physician must start from nature with an open mind. There are many healing modalities to choose from, and the most effective path will be very personal to you, in some combination of one or many of these. Working on your nervous system and releasing trauma. This can be yoga, breath work, tapping, emotional freedom. There are so many modalities. Just look into it, find something that works for you. Restoring your sexual energy or gender polarity. This is a huge one. I'm going to be doing a presentation on this for sure, of the absolute devastation caused by this gender war going on between the sexes and even internally, people through the trans movement and all this kind of stuff. Deep introspection and shadow work, personal accountability, learning healthy mindsets and coping tools to navigate difficult emotions. And as a pagan animist, I utilize the practice of shamanic ritual to bring unresolved trauma and programming to the surface for examination, processing, and release. And spending as much time in nature as also vital to my mental and spiritual health. Healing is about restoring the balance within oneself, not about fixing what's broken. So, by synthesizing and integrating truth and healing, the masculine and feminine components of evolution, your self-worth and self-respect will be restored. You will no longer accept or tolerate abuse from others or desire to engage in self-destructive behaviors. You will begin to love yourself and others and see yourself and the world for what it truly is, beneath all the layers of programming, trauma, distortions, and perversion. A magical playground for consciousness to learn about itself and grow and have beautiful, soul-expanding experiences. By remembering ourselves and becoming an integrated and aligned being, we regain access to our own creative power. By employing holistic intelligence, we can take back control of our trivium and use it to create a different world for ourselves, one of freedom, harmony, and flourishment for all. Only by reclaiming our trivium of consciousness can we break free of mind control and end the perpetual slave system. This can only be achieved by aligning our thoughts, emotions, and actions with objective truth, love, and morality. Through knowledge of self, natural law, and mind control, identifying and eliminating dogma and toxic beliefs, and through true education, mental discernment, scientific testing, direct experience, and connection with nature. By healing, integration, spiritual activation, heart-based intelligence, observing reactivity, emotional discernment, and having healthy coping mechanisms, and achieving emotional restoration and mastery. And through sovereign and moral action, through personal empowerment, civil disobedience, collective non-compliance, pivoting towards systemic independence, healthy behaviors, and authentic individual expression and creativity. Fear is the ultimate gatekeeper for the system, the ultimate cage for your mind. It does far more to enslave you than even the Matrix itself. It allows you to enslave yourself. It keeps you from healing, from facing the truth, and most of all, from discovering and becoming who you truly are and actualizing your fullest potential. The solution to the victim mindset is the warrior mindset. No one can make you feel inferior without your consent. To adopt the mindset of the spiritual warrior is to realize and embody your autonomy and personal responsibility. You refuse to succumb to fear, to let it rule you. You go charging into the darkness of inauthenticity and extract the fragments of gold back into conscious awareness. You refuse to be a victim, even if you've been victimized. You refuse to be a slave, even if you have been enslaved. You refuse to let pain or trauma break your inner knowing of your immutable sovereignty and infinite worth. You stand firmly in your own power and truth. A person with this mindset can never truly be a slave. And this is the mentality that the ruling class fear more than anything else. Become the master of your own mind and let no one take it from you. True personal sovereignty is the ability to choose your own thoughts and emotions regardless of external circumstances. The only true solution. Knowledge of self and nature is the master key to unlocking a different reality and ending the slave system. It should be spread far and wide if we hold any hope to bring about real and lasting change. It all comes back to the prime spiritual principle of self-ownership, to reclaim your mind, body, and soul, and be truly responsible for your thoughts, emotions, and actions. To reclaim your trivium and live as the free, powerful, sovereign, and divine being you are meant to be. Freedom is not something that anybody can be given. Freedom is something people take, and people are as free as they want to be. Our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate. Our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure. So I hope you enjoyed this presentation and that it serves as a tool to break the program and help you actualize your higher self and the possibility of a freer world. If you found it valuable, please like the video, comment your thoughts below, whether you agree, disagree. This was a lot of information. I'm very interested to hear your thoughts on this, and do share with your friends and family. Again, the more shareable size shortened version is available on the Funnel channel. I'll put the link down below in the description. So again, thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you in the next video. But until next time, be empowered, inspired, and encouraged.